The palace had been abandoned for nearly a century, yet the stone still breathed with memory. Wind moved through its broken arches like a mourner pacing the corridors, and the sky above it sagged with heavy violet clouds, threatening rain but never delivering. Though the kingdom around it had fallen into dust, the palace remained, vast and silent, as if waiting for someone who had been promised to it. And on the night the archivist arrived, it felt, if stone can feel anything, recognized. A single torch in his glove hand painted wavering gold across the cracked marble. He advanced slowly through the great foyer, boots grinding against rubble, every sound punctuated by the low, distant groan of the dying structure. He was not the first scholar to attempt access to the sealed vault, but he was, he suspected, the last one alive desperate, or foolish, enough to persist. His breath warmed the stale air inside his mask. Even through the leather he could smell the rot of old tapestries and the faint, mineral scent of the palace's foundations. Before leaving the archives in the capital, he had read the final expedition log. Vault is sealed by the Crown's last decree. Do not unseal. Not even for knowledge. Especially not for knowledge. Naturally, he had come anyway. Knowledge had always been his danger. Curiosity his curse. A slab of stone, taller than any man, stood before him at the far end of the hall, etched with ancient sigils. The seal, its carvings were sharp despite their age, as though time itself refused to erode what kings had sworn to protect. His torch revealed a faint shimmer of dried varnish on the symbols. They had been coated, preserved deliberately. The archivist touched the stone with reverence. "It's real," he whispered. His voice seemed to fall downward, swallowed by the palace's unseen depths. He dropped his pack to the ground. The metal clasp clattered. From within, he retrieved a device he had spent half a lifetime reconstructing, a key not shaped like any key at all. It resembled a tripod of brass rods with a lattice of interlocking gears in the center. When held to the right sigil on the stone slab, the gears were meant to turn, driven by mechanisms hidden beyond the wall. Long ago, engineers of the Crown had designed this lock so that only a royal archivist, trained in the esoteric arts of mechanical ciphering, could operate it. Also, the legends had claimed. He prayed they were true. Legends had a habit of lying. The archivist knelt and aligned the rods with the sigil, a crown formed from knotted serpents. At first, nothing happened. Then the gears quivered, shuddered, and turned. A heavy internal click reverberated through the slab. A sound like a long breath escaped from behind the stone. The palace grew colder. The archivist stepped back as the slab slid downward into the floor with impossible silence, revealing a yawning mouth of darkness. His torchlight barely pierced it. The air from below smelled different, older, wetter, tinged with some faint metallic note. He felt his chest tighten, but not from fear. Anticipation, perhaps confirmation. The vault truly existed, untouched for generations, sealed with intention, and calling now like a heartbeat from another time. He descended. The staircase spiraled endlessly downward, carved directly into the rock beneath the palace. Torchlight quivered over the curved walls, revealing murals of kings whose faces he recognized from historical archives, though never in such poses, never rendered with such haunting intimacy. He saw King Ashva cradling a bowl of obsidian water beneath a moonless sky. Queen Regent Lythane seated upon a bed carved from fossilized bone, holding a scepter shaped like a spinal column. King Theron kneeling before a shrouded figure whose hands extended like branches. None of these scenes appeared in the official records. The archivist slowed. What he saw depicted were rituals, intimate rites, some private, some ceremonial, all heavy with mystery, and all staged within chambers draped in the silks and symbols of the royal bed. He raised the torch to study one mural more closely. This particular panel showed two figures intertwined, not in romance, he noticed, but in strict symmetry. Their foreheads touched, their arms were positioned in such deliberate, mirror configurations that the scene looked less like an embrace and more like an invocation. The first bonding of twin souls, he recalled, heart-quickening, mentioned once in the banned manuscript, dismissed by scholars as myth, a ritual said to fuse the king's life force to another, consort, guardian, or shadow. The specifics had been lost. Yet here they were, depicted openly in stone, without shame or modesty, surrounded by runes that carried the faintest luminescent sheen as of their remembered light. "How deep does this go?" he whispered. Deeper than he imagined. The staircase continued, spiraling into colder shadow. His torch felt weak, frail, threatened by a darkness that seemed to pulse. His boots hit the final step at last, and he found himself facing a narrow hallway lined with obsidian tiles. The walls were smooth and seamless, unlike the rough-hewn stone above. A vault indeed. At the end of the hallway stood a door made not of wood nor iron, but of some dark, unidentifiable alloy etched with swirling sigils. A single glyph in the center glowed faintly red when his torch approached. He recognized it from forbidden literature, all necks, the seal of Night Sovereigns. The archivist swallowed tightly. He pressed his palm to the door. The metal warmed beneath his skin. The sigils brightened, swirling to life. With a slow groan, like a beast awakening, the door receded into the floor. Cold egg exhaled outward, carrying the scent of dust and something older than dust. The archivist stepped through. The chamber was circular, vast, shadowed. Torches along the walls flickered to life on their own, lighting the room in pale blue fire. The archivist startled, but quickly realized the flames were chemical, activated by A-flow, not magic. At least, not entirely magic. The chamber's centerpiece was a stone pedestal, waist-high, upon which rested a codex unlike anything he had ever seen. A book of stone, bound not with metal clasps, nor wire, nor leather, but with sinew. He approached slowly. The codex was carved from slate-black granite, each page impossibly thin, a finger's width at most. The sinew binding it, pale, taut, almost translucent, flexed faintly as if it still lived. He hesitated. Then he reached out. His fingertips brushed the cover. The room dimmed around him. A thrumming sound rose from the pedestal, so subtle he felt it more than heard it, as though the codex possessed a pulse. He lifted the cover. Dust spiraled upward in lazy circles. His torchlight revealed the first page, a title etched in curling script of obsidian ink. The Night Laws of the Crown. His breath hitched. He had found it. The legendary text of royal rituals believed to be myth, superstition, or propaganda. The book kings were rumored to consult before marriage, coronation, or, whispered by the bold, before any moment shared within the royal bed. The archivist leaned closer, tracing the script with shaking fingertips. The letters felt warm. He turned the page. The next sheet displayed an illustration framed by geometric sigils. Two figures again, a king and a masked companion, kneeling on opposite sides of a vast, circular tapestry inscribed with concentric rings of ancient text. Between them lay a bowl of dark liquid absorbing the torchlight without reflection. Beneath the image, lines of script curled tightly. Right eye, the vigil of the unseen companion. The archivist inhaled sharply. He read, "Before the king has eyes to rule the waking world, he must first kneel with that which walks beside him in shadow. In the hour when the moon sinks beyond the horizon, the sovereign must invite the unseen companion into the chamber and share the vigil until dawn's first breath. Only then may the crown sit safely upon his brow." He paused, absorbing each word. This was the first of the bedroom rites, whispered in rumors, banished from official archives. Kings had been required to perform these rituals not by priests or scholars, but by tradition older than both. Not merely symbolic rites. Intimate rites. Occult rites. The archivist's torch flickered as if reacting. He turned the page, though a tremor worked through his hand. Rite 2. The page bore a new illustration. A bed draped in curtains woven with hundreds of eyes, their pupils black voids. The king stood before it with a hand pressed over his chest, while an attendant, face hidden, held a dagger angled toward the mattress. Below, the text read, Rite 2, the severing of a waking thread. The king must surrender a fragment of himself to the chamber of eyes. It watches all nights, weighs all dreams, judges all intentions. In this ritual, the sovereign places a waking thread, taken from the place closest to the heart, upon the sacred bedding so the chamber may devour his weakness. The archivist exhaled. This ritual he had read of only once, buried in a footnote. Scholars had dismissed it as metaphor. Yet here was undeniable evidence it was codified law. He stared at the eerie depiction. What kind of kings required these things? He murmured. The chamber did not answer, but the shadows seemed to listen. He closed the codex slowly, for despite his hunger for knowledge, he felt the weight of the vault intensifying. The blue flames along the walls dimmed, as though the room itself sensed his intrusion. He stepped back, but his foot brushed something. He stiffened, slowly lowering his torch. There, partially hidden by dust, lay dozens of thin objects scattered around the pedestal. Broken quills, droplets of long-dried ink, torn scraps of parchment, and bones, small, delicate, unmistakably human. Finger bones, archivist bones, his pulse hammered. He had not been the first to reach the codex, only the first to open it. The chamber's silence deepened. The archivist felt the stone beneath his boots shift, almost imperceptibly, like something awakening far below. He forced himself to breathe steadily. You came for knowledge. Knowledge demands something in return. He lifted the torch higher, scanning the edges of the chamber. Carvings lined the circular walls, dozens of them, far older than the murals above. Scenes of kings kneeling before indistinct figures, shadows crowned with impossible shapes, beds draped with talismanic chains, curtains embroidered with runes that repeated like chants. The archivist realized these engravings were older than the codex, much older. The rituals predated writing, predated kings, predated crowns. What were you all trying to appease? He whispered. As if in response, the torchlight dimmed. The codex shifted on the pedestal with a soft scraping sound. The archivist froze. It had moved, not by much, a fraction of an inch, but enough to make his throat tighten. His instinct screamed to run. But scholars do not run from knowledge. They kneel before it. He steadied himself. This is only a book of history, he told the darkness. The rites were symbolic. They cannot. A low hum crawled through the room. The codex's pages fluttered once, then fell still. His hands tingled. He realized the sinew binding had tightened. Without touching it, he whispered, you were never meant to be opened again. A memory uncoiled in his mind, the last entry of the final royal archivist, dated just before the palace was abandoned. It feeds on witness. The archivist swallowed. He felt suddenly as if every flame in the chamber leaned toward him. He needed to leave, immediately, but the codex was open, and leaving without transcribing what he'd read, without capturing the truth, was unthinkable. Scholars died for less. He pulled a parchment roll from his pack, unhooked the portable ink vial, and knelt. The first two rites he transcribed in hurried strokes, careful yet trembling, capturing every detail, every symbol, every subtlety of language. His breath fogged the air despite the heat of the torch. When he finished, he blew lightly to dry the ink and packed the parchment away. He looked at the codex again. At the third page, the next rite had not yet been read. His fingers hovered over the stone. Curiosity warred with instinct. He should leave. He should flee now before the chamber's strange pulse tightened its hold. The air felt thick, oppressive, like grave soil settling around a coffin. But the archivist was not merely curious. He was devoted to truth, to history, to uncovering the rituals that shaped the kingdom's fate. He touched the page. The codex warmed beneath his fingertips and opened itself. The archivist gasped. The stone page flipped not with the heaviness of rock, but with the ease of paper. The sinew binding rippled like muscle. His torch flared blue. The chamber's torches sparked simultaneously, as if exhaling. On the newly revealed page, the third ritual waited, but the archivist could no longer tell whether he had chosen to turn the page, or whether the book had chosen for him. And so the framed story begins. The archivist stands inside a vault built not merely to protect knowledge, but to contain it. The codex he has uncovered chronicles 15 forbidden rituals practiced by ancient kings, each more arcane and unsettling than the last. He has read only the first two. Yet already the shadows stir. Already the vault breathes. Already the historian's fate is entangled with the rites he sought only to study. And as the chamber tightens its silent grip, he knows one truth with terrible clarity. The bedroom rituals of the crown were not designed to honor their rule. They were designed to ensure their survival. Or something else is. The archivist held his torch close as he turned the third page of the stone codex. Dust coiled upward from the etched surface like incense smoke, curling and unfurling in thin spirals. The chamber around him seemed to tighten, the air thickening as the next set of rites revealed themselves. A faint warmth radiated from the stone, and for a moment he felt as though he were no longer deep beneath an abandoned palace, but standing beneath a sky swollen with heat, dry, scorching, shimmering like desert mirages. The script on the page glowed faintly. The deserts of Kesha, it began, where kings were made not by birth, but by endurance. The archivist steadied his breath. Here began the oldest and most feared rites of all. The first monarch of sand, King Na the Wind Listener. The codex's illustration sprawled across both pages, a man seated cross-legged upon a dune of burning gold. His posture was rigid, his spine straight, his eyes closed. Behind him, a towering monolith rose from the sand, carved with glyphs of spiraling wind. At his side knelt a woman adorned in long veils, her hands cupped around a brazier of fragrant smoke. The archivist leaned closer. Heat seemed to radiate from the depiction itself. Below the illustration flowed the script. Rite 3, the binding of breath and crown. In the year when the desert sun bore down unbroken and the sands consumed 3 cities, the first wind listener performed the rite of breath binding. In the perfumed chamber of zephyrs, he surrendered his breath to the witness who would hold his life between her palms. For a king of Kesha must command the winds not by strength, but by relinquishing breath itself. The archivist swallowed. He knew fragments of this legend, that the desert monarchs were said to speak to storms, to halt sandstorms with a gesture, to command the wind as both weapon and omen. Scholars dismiss these claims as myths, but myths rarely left such detailed instructions carved in stone. He read on. In the chamber of zephyrs, whose walls were lined with mirrored bronze to reflect the heat inward, the monarch seated himself upon the central stone slab. Before him stood the breath-bearer, chosen not by affection nor lineage, but by the desert's own omens. At the ritual's beginning, braziers of myrrh and burning cedar flooded the chamber with smoke so dense it veiled the senses. The king inhaled until his chest ached, until heat shimmered behind his eyes, until breath itself weighed like molten ore. Then he ceased. The archivist paused. Ceased? Ceased what? He continued reading. In absolute stillness, the king forbade his lungs their pilgrimage to air. The breath-bearer knelt at his side, her palms hovering inches from his face, catching the heat of his exhalation. She did not touch him, for direct contact would bind a spirit too closely to his and risk collapse of the rite. Instead, she whispered the invocation of the 4 winds, allowing her breath to mingle with the incense. Through her voice, his withheld breath found echo. The archivist could practically hear that whisper, soft, rhythmic, wavering through a chamber thick with heat and smoke. He imagined the king sitting still as stone, his body trembling between life and collapse. This ritual required more than endurance. It demanded surrender to suffocation. He read the next line. If the king broke first, if he inhaled before the final verse, the winds of Kesha would abandon him. His rule would fall into ruin. His line would wither. The desert itself would reject him, and a storm would rise that night to claim his throne. The archivist closed his eyes for a moment. This was no metaphor. This was law, etched in stone, fueled by fear older than monarchy. But the codex was not finished. On the next page, more text coiled like serpents. For those who succeeded, the sky shifted. The desert winds bent around the chambers of Kesha, whispering the sovereign's name. And when the monarch stepped outside, the dunes shaped themselves to welcome him. A subtle tremor ran through the archivist's hands. The weight of the desert king's power, its danger, pressed through time. He turned the page. The queen who held the sand, Escher of the Red Veil. The next illustration was darker. A queen stood alone atop a dune under moon that resembled a dull, blood-red ember. Her veil billowed behind her, trailing dozens of red ribbons that merged with the swirling sands. She held a bowl carved from black volcanic glass. Inside it glowed a plume of smoke shaped like a serpent. The archivist exhaled, the hairs along his arms rising. This queen, unlike the breath-bearer of the first rite, was no passive participant. She was conduit and executioner. He began reading. Rite 4, the offering of shadow breath. During the reign of Escher of the Red Veil, the desert winds grew wild, bending to no incantation. The dunes swallowed caravans whole. The storms howled with voices believed to be the dead kings of Keshar, restless after centuries of forgotten rites. To restore balance, Queen Escher invoked the offering of shadowed breath, a rite practiced only once a generation, and only when the desert demanded appeasement. The archivist frowned. He had never encountered this rite in any historical record. The queen's consort, chosen for strength of spirit rather than rank, entered the chamber of veiled sands. It was a place where heat did not merely exist. It hunted. Incense hung so heavy it turned the air viscous. Shadows clung to the corners like beasts waiting to pounce. There, the consort knelt upon a tapestry woven from desert grasses hardened by sun and ritual ash. Across from him the queen knelt with a bowl of serpent smoke. The rite began when the queen inhaled the smoke directly, holding it within her lungs until her eyes watered and her pulse ran ragged. The archivist paused. She inhaled smoke. Voluntarily, he read on. Then she exhaled it slowly, not toward the air, but toward the spirit of the consort. The smoke enveloped him like a living shroud, binding breath to breath, shadow to shadow. He was forbidden to speak. He was forbidden to breathe deeply. His lungs were required to mirror the queen's rhythm, however fast, however slow, however strained. For in that shared breath, life and fate intertwined. Should they fall out of sync, the desert would sense discord and swallow the palace in a single storm. The archivist's chest tightened. A ritual of synchronization so exact that a single stray breath could doom an entire dynasty. No wonder these rites had been erased. They were too dangerous to preserve. His eyes moved to the next portion of script. The queen then recited the 9 winds benediction while maintaining the rhythm. When the final syllable passed her lips, she crushed the serpent-shaped charcoal within the bowl. The smoke darkened into a swirling mass, rising like a storm cloud in miniature. If the desert accepted the offering, the smoke dissipated harmlessly. A line of smaller, jagged script followed. If it did not, the smoke would seek breath of its own. The archivist nearly dropped his torch. Seek breath? He read faster. Many kings had died this way, lungs filled with shadows, their bodies found with expressions twisted in frozen silence, as though the smoke had stolen the last words from their throats. The archivist's pulse thudded. He thought he felt something stir in the chamber with him, a faint shift of air, too subtle for the sealed vault. He forced himself to continue. Queen Escher succeeded. The desert winds calmed. The dunes ceased their wandering. And for a generation, Keshar prospered beneath a moon that glowed silver once more. The illustration of the queen seemed to shimmer. Her veil trailed off the stone page like smoke. The archivist took a steadying breath. He turned the page. The uncrowned heir, the boy with no shadow. Here the codex displayed a scene unlike the previous ones. A young prince, no more than 12, stood alone inside a chamber lined with sandstone columns. But something was strange about the image. The torchlight reflected across the stone rendered the prince's shadow as faint, blurred, incomplete, as though it resisted being captured. The archivist felt a chill. He read, Rite V, the breath that was not his. In the 43rd year of Keshar's 3rd dynasty, a prince was born during a storm that devoured half the capital. Winds tore roof from houses and sand flayed the skin of those caught outdoors. When the prince inhaled for the first time, the storm ceased. And at that moment, his shadow faded. The archivist's skin prickled. Priests whispered he had been born with too much breath, or perhaps none at all. The queen, fearing the desert's wrath, invoked a rite forbidden to all but the eldest kings, the rite of the borrowed breath. This was new, entirely new. The archivist leaned closer, breath fogging. In this ritual, a companion, chosen for purity of intention, shared breath with the prince in intervals dictated by celestial charts. The companion inhaled deeply, then exhaled toward the prince, who accepted the breath as though it were his own. The ritual was not intimate by affection, but by necessity, binding essence to tether the prince to this world. For without borrowed breath, he would drift like a grain of sand in the desert storms, claimed by unseen forces. The archivist imagined the chamber, the flicker of oil lamps, the scorching air, the companion trembling as breath transferred, the boy's chest rising slowly, uncertainly. He continued reading. The ritual required perfect repetition over 27 nights. A single deviation, a breath too shallow, a pause too long, would sever the prince's tether to his body. On the final night, a storm gathered. The desert wind clawed at the palace windows. And when the companion inhaled for the final offering, the wind stole her breath before she could give it. The archivist's heart thudded. The script darkened. The prince's body collapsed. His shadow vanished entirely, but the breath, denied a vessel, lingered. Those in the palace heard a voice whispering through the chambers for 3 nights, soft, childlike, calling for breath that was no longer his. The archivist shivered violently. The faint shift of air in the vault returned. He suddenly felt as though something, perhaps breath itself, moved behind him, waiting. He did not turn. Instead, he gripped the codex with white knuckles and forced his eyes onward. The consequence of broken rights. The codex turned darker here. The stone pages roughened, etched with deeper, harsher carving. The next script read, "Let it be known, the desert does not forgive. Kings who faltered in the breath-binding were buried not with honor but with sin filling their lungs, their tombs sealed in silence. Queens who violated the offering of shadowed breath found their veils turned stiff as blooded cloth, as though soaked in something thicker than dye. Companions who misaligned their breath with the sovereigns felt the desert wind reach inside them, pulling warmth from their bones. Every line dripped with consequence. Every ritual bore not symbolic weight, but threat. The archivist felt his own breathing grow shallow. His torch flickered, dimming for a moment, then flared as though sucking in air. He paused. The torch had never behaved like that before. He turned the page. A final warning. The last portion of the section presented no illustration, only text carved deep, as though gouged by a sharpened stone. These rites are not merely remembered. They listen. The desert kings commanded winds only because the winds permitted it. And those who read these words must guard their breath, for knowledge carries weight, and deserts hunger for unguarded breath. The archivist stepped back instinctively. The torch wavered. The chamber's air felt thicker than before, dense, almost suffocating. A faint whisper moved across the vault. Not a voice. A breath. Exhaled by no one. A cold wind curled behind his ear, though the vault was sealed. The archivist snapped the codex shut, heart pounding. The sinew binding tense as a resisting closure. The torch dimmed again. The vault grew warmer. Almost desert hot. He shoved the codex fully shut at last. The whispering breath stilled, but the air did not lighten. The archivist backed away slowly, parchment in hand, chest tight. He had read too much, far too much, yet the codex waited. 13 more rituals lay within, and with each one he felt the vault's hunger sharpening, as though knowledge itself was feeding on him. The archivist did not move for some time. The breath that had whispered through the vault, thin, cold, unclaimed, seemed to curl still in the air around him. His torch hissed faintly as though reacting to an unseen draft. He could feel the codex vibrating slightly under his hand, a steady pulse like the tremor of a sleeping beast. He had no illusions. Closing the book had not silenced it. Knowledge was awake now. He steadied his breath, recentered his grip, and slowly opened the codex again. The sinew binding flexed, as if warm blood still ran through it. Stone pages shifted to the next section with unnatural ease. The archivist braced himself. This chapter's title spread across a double page in tall, frozen script. The Twin Thrones of the Northern Empire. Immediately, a wave of cold radiated from the stone, thrusting the edges of the page. The archivist blinked as his torchlight glinted off fresh ice that formed instantaneously across the carvings. The air in the vault grew wintry. This section was older still, inked with pigments taken from permafrost, preserved in alchemical binders used only by empires long drowned in snow. He leaned closer. The illustration covering the top half showed a pair of men standing back to back upon a circular dais. Their features were identical, down to the shape of their eyes, the cut of their cloaks, the angle of their posture. Only their crowns differed. One bore a band of silver etched with mirrored sigils, the other a circlet of blackened iron polished to shine like obsidian. Behind them rose an immense palace carved entirely from ice, its towers crystalline, its windows rimmed with frost that resembled staring eyes. Twin emperors, co-sovereigns, and, as the archivist suspected from fragmentary records, bound together by the strangest rites of all. He began to read. The brothers born of the winter eclipse. Rite 6, the mirror oath of the Northern Crown. In the age when winter buried the sun for weeks at a time, the Northern Empire swore allegiance not to one sovereign, but to two. Twins born under the winter eclipse, an omen that marked them as co-rulers destined to share not only power, but breath, shadow, and sleep. Their names, Eric and Nerian, the Mirror Princes. The archivist felt a prickling sensation crawl along the back of his neck. He had read of the eclipse-born rulership in scattered texts, each referencing rumors of rituals too strange to record. Most dismissed them as exaggerations, but here, etched in stone, were their origins. At the age of 13, the princes were brought to the Chamber of Reflections. Its walls were made not of glass, but of polished diamond ice, capable of capturing not only light but motion. The ritual began at moonrise. Servants extinguished all lanterns, leaving only 2 candles, one placed before each prince. The flames quivered as though sensing the rite about to unfold. The archivist narrowed his eyes. Candles again. In this codex, fire was never merely fire. He read on. The princes faced each other, each placing a hand upon the other's chest. They were required to match their breath precisely. When one inhaled, the other must do so at the exact same moment. When one exhaled, the other followed. This was a mirror oath, binding their rule to alignment, not only of policy, but of identity. The archivist paused. 4 co-rulers to align their breath in ritual sync suggested a closeness deeper than brotherhood. He continued, if either prince faltered, if even a single breath diverged, the diamond ice walls captured the error. Their reflections distorted, reshaping into fractured silhouettes, warning that imbalance would bring ruin. And if imbalance persisted for more than 9 breaths, the chamber would crack. The archivist sucked in a quick breath. Crack was a mild word, he suspected. He examined the illustration beneath the text. Indeed, faint lines, fracture marks, radiated from the edges of the chamber. The northern kings performed rites that physically reshaped their environment. He returned to the text. But Eric and Nerian succeeded. Their breaths synchronized perfectly. So perfectly, the candles between them flickered identically, their flames bending toward each other as though drawn by invisible strings. When the rite ended, their reflections in the diamond ice no longer behaved independently. When one brother raised his arm, the reflections of both raised as simultaneously. The archivist inhaled sharply. A mirrored identity, not symbolic, literal. He turned the page, which chilled his fingertips. A thin layer of frost gathered across the stone. He brushed it aside with caution. The knightly rites of the twin thrones. The next pages depicted the emperors as adults, standing in a chamber lit by dozens of candles whose flames leaned sideways, as if pushed by invisible hands. Servants cowered in the shadows, their written accounts carved faintly beneath the image. The archivist began reading. Rite 7, the doubling of the sovereign flame. Each night, before resting, the twin emperors performed the rite of doubling. The practice was simple in description, yet perilous in execution. They entered the chamber of echoing glass, accompanied by 12 attendants who served only as witnesses. In this chamber, candles arranged in a circle lit without torch or spark, ignited by the presence of the emperors alone. The archivist felt an involuntary shudder. Candles that lit themselves. He read the servant accounts carved below. Account I. Upon their arrival, the flames rose as though inhaling. The room brightened to painful intensity. Shadows vanished, but the Emperor's reflections multiplied, dozens of mirrored doubles appearing along the glass walls. Some reflections moved slightly out of rhythm. The archivist frowned. Out of rhythm? He read on. Account 2. When Emperor Eric lifted his hand, 3 reflections hesitated before following. When Emperor Arian blinked, 1 reflection did not. The archivist's pulse quickened. The reflections were aware. Account 3. During the doubling, we heard whispers behind the glass. The sound resembled voices speaking our names backward. The archivist clenched his jaw. Backward names. Identity folding inward. He continued with the main script. During the doubling rite, the emperors faced each other in silence. From their stillness, the candles leaned inward, as though bowing. The flames merged into one collective fire, one soul of light, mirrored between the 2 rulers. The purpose was clear, to maintain unity not only in rule, but in thought. For the Northern Empire believed that 2 minds ruling as one were invincible, but 2 minds drifting apart were a disaster waiting to consume them both. The archivist's eyes scanned the next paragraph. If either emperor harbored doubt, fear, or ambition unshared, the candles signaled it. Their flames separated, dividing into chaotic flickers. Whispers crawled through the chamber. Ice formed on the walls with patterns resembling fractures in bone. The archivist's torch sputtered softly. He touched the next carved line carefully. Should the brothers drift too far from unity, the ritual demanded correction. The chamber of echoing glass would begin to fill with frost, and a voice, never identified, would speak from within the reflections, urging the emperors to reconcile their thoughts or risk losing their shared identity. The archivist licked his dry lips. Reconcile or lose themselves. He turned the page. The servants' testimonies. This section contained no illustrations, only transcripts, etched quickly, as though by trembling hands. The archivist read the first. Testimony of Palace Attendant Raylan. During the winter of the 4th alignment, I was asked to bring additional candles to the chamber. Before I entered, I glanced through the door's ice window. I saw the emperors standing still, but their reflections continued to move long after they had stopped. The archivist inhaled sharply. The next testimony carved beneath it read, When Emperor Eric stepped forward, his reflection did not follow. Instead, a second reflection, one I had never seen, stepped into place. It smiled in a manner no living man would. The glass cracked. A chill raced down the archivist's spine. He read on. The candles nearest the emperors bent toward them as though reaching. The flames whispered. I swear by the northern ice, they whispered. Another line beneath. The whispers came from the reflections. The archivist's torch wavered. Reflections whispering. Candles bending. Glass watching. He turned the page, breath shallow now. The night of the divergence. The codex's next illustration was sharper than the others, as though carved during a moment of panic. Lines cut deep into the stone depicted the 2 emperors standing apart for the first time. Their shadows pointed in opposite directions. Their reflections, all of them, faced the viewer, eyes hollow, mouths open, screaming silently. The archivist swallowed hard. He looked to the new script. Rite 8, the veil of the broken mirror. In the 8th year of their co-rule, the twin emperors experienced a division of thought. Emperor Eric favored expansion toward the lowlands. Emperor Arian counseled restraint. A minor disagreement by ordinary standards. But for mirrored rulers, a split of intention was catastrophic. That night, the doubling rite began as usual. Candles lit themselves in perfect ring. Reflections aligned. Breath synchronized. Until Eric blinked. And Arian did not. The archivist froze. He scanned the next paragraph. The reflections detected the divergence first. Their mouths opened in unison. Walls frosted over. Candles leaned away from each other. The empire shuddered beneath a sudden wind that howled through corridors despite sealed windows. The archivist felt the vault tremble faintly, or perhaps it was only his imagination. The brothers attempted resynchronization. They stood face to face. They breathed together. But identity, once fractured, is not easily restored. The chamber of echoing glass darkened. One reflection stepped out of sync. Then another. Soon half the mirror doubles moved independently. Whispers rose, the same voice speaking from dozens of angles, urging them to choose one identity, one path, or perish. The archivist's throat tightened. The brothers pressed their foreheads together, attempting to restore unity. But the reflections would not relent. Finally, the candles extinguished themselves. All at once. The archivist closed his eyes. When he opened them, the carved script continued. The servants found the emperors unconscious on the chamber floor. The glass walls were fractured into thousands of pieces, yet none had fallen. They clung to the frames like frozen spiderwebs. A new reflection stared from each shard, and each bore a different expression. The archivist felt sweat cooling on his neck despite the vault's chill. The throne of mirrors restored. The next page glowed faintly, as though infused with frozen moonlight. In the weeks that followed, the emperors secluded themselves. Their nightly rites intensified, performed not once, but thrice each night. At each session, attendants noted new anomalies. Candles melting upward instead of down. Shadows refusing to follow the emperor's movements. Reflections that aged while the brothers remained youthful. Voices humming beneath the ice floors in tones that did not match any known language. The archivist felt the cold seeping into his bones. He read the final portion of this section slowly. At last, after 40 nights of ritual correction, the emperors emerged. Their eyes were identical in color and clarity once more. Their breath matched perfectly. Their voices echoed faintly when they spoke, each sentence carrying a double tone. Political unity returned to the empire. Decisions made by one were reflected instantly by the other. Laws passed effortlessly. Subjects rejoiced at the restored harmony. But the palace servants whispered the emperors were no longer two men. They were one identity divided into two bodies. And at night, the reflections in the palace windows watched them with something resembling longing. Final warning of the northern rites. The Codex's last lines of this chapter were carved in frost-like script. Power doubled is power doubled in danger. Those who seek unity must beware the price. Mirrors do not merely reflect. They seek to complete. And when they see imbalance, they intervene. The archivist's torch extinguished suddenly. The vault plunged into darkness. For a moment, he heard something behind him, a soft sound, as though a candle flame leaned in his direction. He did not turn. Slowly, with trembling hands, he lit the torch again. The Codex waited. More rituals to read, more dangers to awaken. But the northern rites left him shaken more than the desert ones. For breath can be controlled. Shadows can be bargained with. But reflections have minds of their own. The archivist felt a faint vibration pushing through the stone beneath his knees as he turned the next page of the Codex. Something like a distant current hummed just beyond the vault walls. Impossible, given that the palace stood far from any body of water. And yet, the moment he touched the carved surface, the air grew damp. His torch crackled. Moisture condensed on the stone as if he had stepped into a fog bank. The new chapter title rippled faintly, as though carved into the illusion of water rather than solid stone. The Wailing King of the River Kingdom. A cold drop slid down the archivist's wrist. He wiped it instinctively, then froze. The page was dry. The drip had not come from the Codex. He stared at the ceiling of the vault. No water, just darkness. Holding his breath, the archivist lowered his eyes to the chapter, where an illustration spread across the slate in soft, flowing lines. It showed a chamber floating above a wide river at night, tethered by ropes to long wooden poles driven into the riverbanks. Lanterns drifted around the chamber like fireflies suspended in glass globes. The curtains billowed even though the illustration depicted a still night. And in the center of the floating room, a figure stood with arms outstretched, head thrown back, mouth open in a cry the archivist could almost hear. The king, the Wailing King. He began to read. The king who sang to the water. Rite 9, the Night of Lamentation. In the river kingdom of Haleth, power did not come from bloodlines nor conquest. It came from lament, the art of vocalizing sorrow so profound that it reached the river spirits dwelling between the waking world and the drowned. Every king learned to wail, but only one mastered it so completely the river itself bowed to his voice. The archivist swallowed. He had heard rumors of the wailing king in childhood, stories of a monarch whose cries could bend currents, flood cities, or lull entire armies into sleep. But he had believed them folklore. Not so. King Hethril of the Seventh Tide, crowned at 20, inherited the throne during a year of violent waters. The rivers rose unseasonably, swelling with unseen turbulence. Entire villages fled inland. Priests claimed the spirits were furious, angered by forgotten rituals and broken vows. To appease them, Hethril descended into the chamber of the drifting moon. The archivist's eyes lifted to the illustration again, the floating chamber tethered by thick ropes to poles driven deep into the riverbanks. A ritual platform that moved with the water. The chamber was a circular pavilion made of lacquered wood, painted white to reflect moonlight. Its floorboards were drilled with holes so the river could breathe through it. Curtains of sheer silk hung around the edges, dancing constantly as if stirred by invisible movements beneath the surface. Lanterns drifted around the chamber, tethered by long, winding cords that allowed them to sway with the current. Their light refracted across the water, painting the pavilion in wavering gold. The archivist could imagine it. The entire room trembling faintly with the pulse of the river, the curtains whispering against one another, the lanterns circling like patient watchers. He continued. On the first night of the rite, King Hethril stepped barefoot into the floating chamber. He brought with him no guards, no priest, no advisor. Only a single companion, the Dream Walker. The archivist's pulse quickened. Dream Walkers were figures he had read of in fringe manuscripts, individuals capable of drifting between waking and sleeping states without losing consciousness entirely. Yet here, the Codex described them as integral. The Dream Walker knelt across from Hethril, placing her hands upon the damp wooden floor. She did not speak. Speech was forbidden. Instead, she watched the king with half-lidded eyes, already drifting at the edge of sleep. Her presence was not optional. Without a Dream Walker, the river spirits could not be reached. And without spirits, no lament, however pure, could be heard. The archivist shivered. A ritual performed to an unseen audience. He read on. The chamber that floated between two worlds. The next page depicted a diagram of the floating ritual chamber, annotated with sigils and lines indicating tether points, smoke paths, and water currents. The archivist studied it briefly, marveling at how much engineering and mysticism intertwined in this ritual. Below the diagram, the text continued. The chamber of the drifting moon existed in a twilight space, neither fully anchored to land nor fully surrendered to water. Its ropes allowed it to move with the river's tide, swaying gently but undeniably. This motion lulled the Dream Walker into a trance. Once the moon reached its zenith, Hethril began to lament. He inhaled deeply, drawing the humid air into his lungs, filling his chest until it ached with heaviness. His first cry pierced the night, a high wail that resonated across the river. The sound was not meant for human ears. It was meant for what lived below. The archivist paused, imagining the king standing at the chamber's center, his voice rising into the darkness, and the river listening. Witnesses on the shore reported that the water shifted when the lament began. Not rippled, shifted, as if the river took a breath of its own. The archivist flexed his fingers, breathing water. He read more carefully now. As Hethril wailed, the Dream Walker drifted deeper into a trance, her consciousness slipping beneath the river's surface without her body moving. Her spirit walked the currents, seeking the listeners. She would guide the lament to the spirits. Or, if the spirits judged Hethril unworthy, she would be claimed first. A thin chill crawled across the archivist's scalp. Sacrifice through dreams. He turned the page. The lament that opened the waters. The next stone leaf displayed a depiction of Hethril mid-cry, his hair blown back, his body arched, his hands trembling from the sheer force of the sound. Around him, the lanterns leaned inward, not from wind, but drawn toward his voice. Underneath, the script read. The king's lament deepened as the rite progressed. His wail shifted from raw sound to resonance, a trembling hum that made the floorboards quiver beneath his feet. The Dreamwalker's breathing slowed until it matched the river's pulse. Her eyes rolled back, revealing pale whites. The water beneath the chamber darkened, as if something vast moved far below. If the spirits welcomed the lament, they would allow the water to rise and cradle the chamber like a hand. If they rejected it, the chamber would list violently, and someone would be pulled beneath the surface. The archivist's breath caught. He had heard versions of these tales before. Stories of servants swept away by invisible currents, of kings returning shaken and silent from a floating chamber. But those were bedtime myths. This was history carved in stone. The next paragraph chilled him further. On the seventh lament, the river spoke back, not figuratively, literally. Witnesses on the shore claimed they heard a sound like a child crying beneath the water, its voice distant yet unmistakably real. The lanterns flickered. The curtains trembled. The Dreamwalker's body tilted backward as if tugged by unseen hands. The spirits had heard. The archivist felt his heart thudding with a strange rhythm. He wiped condensation from the codex with trembling fingers. He read on. The Dreamwalker's descent. The following page depicted the Dreamwalker, not as she appeared in the waking world, but as she moved through the river's dreamscape. Her form was soft-edged, luminescent, drifting through a world of submerged darkness. Strange shapes surrounded her, long, fluid, almost human, almost fish-like. The spirits. As the king wailed, the Dreamwalker wandered deeper into the river's subconscious. The water was not water here. It was memory, breath, lament given shape. She sought the spirits who judged the right. These beings were ancient remnants of the drowned, those who had lived along the river before the first kingdom was built, whose voices merged with the current over centuries. They slumbered at the river's depths, waking only when the king's lament pierced the boundary between worlds. The archivist felt a faint pressure in his ears, as if he were descending underwater. If the Dreamwalker found them, she would offer her own sorrow, small compared to the king's, but necessary. Spirits required dual lament, one from crown, one from flesh. Only then would they decide whether the king's rule remained in harmony with the river. The archivist frowned. Dual lament? Why dual? He read the next explanation. The river required balance. A king's grief was shaped by rule, distant, heavy, collected over time. A Dreamwalker's was shaped by living, immediate, visceral, sharp. The spirits judged power not by authority, but by equilibrium of sorrow. The archivist exhaled slowly. A monarchy ruled by sadness. He turned the stone page. The night the waters answered. The final depiction of this ritual spanned the entire page, the chamber glowing with lantern light, floating in perfect stillness as water rose around it in a smooth, silent column. When Hethryl's lament reached its final octave, the river rose without wind. It climbed in a perfect circle around the chamber, forming walls of water taller than a man. The spirits had accepted the lament. The Dreamwalker returned to her body, inhaling sharply as a resurfacing from drowning. Her skin was cold to the touch, colder than river water should allow. The king collapsed to his knees, spent but victorious. The river lowered him slowly, gently. This was a rite of acceptance. But acceptance was not guaranteed. The archivist's stomach knotted as he read the warning carved in darker pigment. If the spirits rejected the lament, the water would not rise around the chamber. It would rise within it. It would climb through the floorboards first, a cold seep that turned quickly into a torrent. Curtains would soak and twist like serpents. Lanterns would extinguish. The Dreamwalker would scream, not with her voice, but with the rivers, and one of them, the king or the companion, would be claimed by the depths. The archivist gripped tightened on the codex. He imagined the floating chamber tipping, lanterns bursting, curtains tearing, and water gushing up like a throat opening beneath the floor. He turned the page cautiously. Historical accounts, the night of the silent river. The next section contained a carved timeline of recorded rites. Most were marked with a symbol for acceptance. A few bore the mark for rejection, a spiral descending inward. But one entry stood out. It had no symbol. Only carved words. Year of the 9th moon, the river fell silent. The archivist's heartbeat quickened. He read the accompanying narrative. During the reign of the 10th Wailing King, something unprecedented occurred. The lament was given, the dream walker descended, and the spirits listened. But they did not respond. No water rose. No water fell. No wind moved. Even the river's surface remained perfectly still. The lantern swayed without touching the air. The dream walker opened her mouth, attempting to speak, but no sound emerged. It was said the river had forgotten how to remember. The archivist shivered violently. No lament, however potent, could reach the spirits that night. The river kingdom feared this silence more than rejection, for rejection meant judgment. Silence meant abandonment. He read the final line of the account. The king wailed until dawn. The river never answered. The archivist steps back. At last, the final portion of the chapter presented a short, carved warning. Sound shapes water. Memory shapes spirits. And lament shapes kings. But beware, the river hears more than the wail. It hears intention. The archivist stared at the etched warning, a tremor running down his spine. The air around him felt heavy, humid now, thick with the presence of something that should not exist underground. His torch flickered violently. A faint trickle sounded somewhere beneath the stone floor. Impossible. The palace vault was dry. The archivist stepped back from the codex. But then, a single drop of cold water landed on the back of his hand. He flinched, looked up. Nothing. Another drop. The archivist swallowed. He backed away, slowly, deliberately, eyes fixed on the codex, which now glistened faintly with a sheen of moisture. He felt as though something beneath the vault had begun listening. And worse, waiting for lament. The archivist sensed a shift before he saw it. Before he turned the stone leaf, before the torchlight shimmered strangely across the codex's etched surface. A moment earlier, moisture had dripped from nowhere. Now, heat pulsed from the slab, as if the stone had been held over embers. The air grew thick with a phantom scent of jasmine and something sharper, like crushed green leaves, or venom warmed by the sun. He exhaled slowly and flipped the next page. The codex changed color. Where previous chapters were carved in ash-gray stone, this one was a deep, glossy green. No pigment. The stone itself had transformed, smooth as polished jade, cooled despite the heat that emanated from beneath the surface. The archivist traced the chapter title with one trembling finger. The Serpent Court of the Jade Dynasty. The letters were shaped like coils. He lifted his torch. The jade reflected the flame in strange, shifting patterns. For a brief moment, he could have sworn the letters moved, not carved, but slithering faintly, like tiny serpents frozen mid-motion. A hiss echoed softly through the vault. He stilled. The sound didn't come from the codex, nor from the room. It came from inside his ears, like a whisper sliding through bone. He steadied his breathing and read. The Court of Living Omen. In the first centuries of the Jade Dynasty, serpents were considered the purest vessels of ancestral thought. Their movements were believed to reveal messages carried from rulers long dead, whispering wisdom through silent, slithering patterns. No decree was written without consulting a serpent's path. No battle was waged without interpreting the coil of its body. No king or queen entered their bedchamber without performing the ritual of jade coiling. The archivist's heartbeat slowed. Bedchambers, yet again, ritualized, sacred, and deeply symbolic. He turned the page. A carved depiction unfolded before him. A ruler seated cross-legged upon a raised platform of lacquered wood, surrounded by serpents whose bodies wound across carpets of gold-threaded silk. Their movements formed intricate spirals around her bare feet. Their scales were cut with such precision that they glinted in the torchlight like real, living creatures. A note beneath the image read, "Serpents of the Jade lineage were not pets. They were emissaries." The archivist swallowed. He read on. The green glazed throne and its monarch. The ruler of the Serpent Court was not referred to as king or queen. They were known simply as a listener, one who received counsel not from ministers, but from coiling bodies. The listener of the Fourth Era was a woman named Shinra, young, sharp-eyed, and raised from infancy to decipher the serpent's language. The archivist lingered on the description. Shinra's carving was framed by vertical lines of jade stone so smooth they resembled silk. Her face was serene, unblinking. Her hair was pinned with jade serpents whose tongues curled like flames. Each night, before private rituals commenced, Shinra read the serpent's movements. She painted her body in ceremonial green pigment, made from ground jade mixed with fragrant oils. Body painting was not decoration. It was a map. The serpents interpreted that map. The archivist felt heat he couldn't explain settle in his chest. He loosened his collar, although the vault was cool. His torch crackled. He continued. Rite 12, the jade coiling. The next page detailed the beginning of the ritual with intricate precision. Before the ritual began, the listener stood beneath the perfumed chimes, a structure of slender jade plates suspended from the ceiling, each etched with ancestral sigils. When incense smoke drifted through them, they sang softly, producing tones set to attract the ancestors' attention. The smoke was made from crushed lotus, dried river herbs, sandalwood, and powdered jade. When the listener inhaled it, her senses sharpened. Every sound deepened. Every movement became readable. And every serpent woke. The archivist imagined it. The soft chiming of jade plates, the gentle hiss of serpents stirring, the drifting tendrils of incense smoke curling through air thick with heat. He turned the page. The body as script. Hey, the codex depicted Shinra standing before a bronze mirror taller than she was. Her body, rendered in careful outline, was marked with swirling patterns of jade pigment. The designs resembled serpent coils, but also rivers, storms, and celestial orbits. Around the borders of the carving, small serpents slithered toward her feet, frozen in mid-motion. The listener's body paint determined the serpent's dance. It created pathways only they could understand. Their movements upon the jade-painted skin revealed the ancestors' messages. The archivist's pulse thudded. When the fur serpent touched her, it did not crawl randomly. It followed the painted coils across her ankle, up her calf, and along the curls of pigment spiraling across her thigh. Each movement, each pause, each flick of its tongue formed a sentence. Shinra read those sentences aloud in the privacy of the ritual chamber. These readings dictated her next actions. The archivist's eyes darted across the stone. Readings, actions, ritual choreography. He kept going. The chamber of silk and jade. The following page showed the listener's ritual chamber. It glowed with lantern light, heavy with shadows shaped like scale creatures. Silk curtains cascaded from the ceiling, layer upon layer, each dyed in shades of green deepest at the top and palest at the floor. The room was designed for serpents as much as for the listener. The floor was padded with embroidered silk cushions. The air was kept warm to honor the creature's comfort. Jade bowls of perfumed water lined the walls, each filled with herbs that encouraged calm or attentiveness. The serpents entered through narrow channels carved in the walls. They moved silently, emerging from the shadows like living ribbons of intent. The listener awaited them at the room's center. The archivist ran his thumb along the edge of the page. Silence filled the vault. His torch flame leaned toward the codex, flickering unnaturally. He cleared his throat and kept reading. Ritual choreography. Once the serpents chose their paths along the listener's painted body, the movement ritual began. It was a slow, precise dance, back straight, feet gliding across silk cushions, gestures echoing ancestral forms. Each movement was guided not by the listener's will, but by the serpent's positions. If a serpent coiled around her left wrist, her right arm must rise. If one circled her waist twice, she rotated her body, letting the serpent's loops dictate the pace. If one crossed her collar, she tilted her head in acknowledgement of message received. The archivist studied the accompanying carvings. Shinra midstep, serpents draped across her shoulders, curling across her painted skin, directing her every motion with subtle tugs and shifts of weight. To an outsider, the ritual might appear like a slow, sensual dance. But to the listener, it was obedience. She moved as the ancestors willed. The archivist inhaled sharply. He felt the heat of the imagined chamber, warm, perfumed, shimmering. He turned the page. Omen behavior. A carved serpent stretched across the next slab, coiled in a spiral that tightened at the center. Beneath it, the warning began. Not all serpent movements were benign. Some were omens. If a serpent froze mid-path, turning its head sharply toward an unseen point in the room, danger loomed. If a serpent's tongue flicked rapidly but its body remained still, betrayal was imminent. If two serpents crossed one another upon the listener's skin, ancestors whispered of war. But the next omen carved in darker strokes caused the archivist's breath to hitch. If a serpent behaved out of omen, moving without pattern, ignoring the jade map, or circling the listener's throat more than once, then the ancestors were not speaking. Something else was. A cold wave slithered down his spine. He read the elaboration slowly. Out-of-omen movements indicated interference from restless spirits, those who died unsatisfied or nameless. Such spirits twisted ritual paths. They sought to guide the listener not toward insight, but toward doom. When a serpent moved out of omen, the ritual was to be stopped immediately. A long pause in the text. Then, stopping it was seldom enough. The archivist's throat tightened. He turned the page. Historical account. The Jade Night of Shinra. The slab turned darker, veined with black streaks through the jade. Ink or natural impurity. The archivist couldn't tell. The discoloration gave the stone an ominous, diseased appearance. It was during the 19th ritual of her reign that listener Shinra encountered an out-of-omen movement. The serpent named Whispercoil, beloved, ancient, and the oldest in the chamber, ignored its prescribed path. It slithered not across the painted map upon her skin, but up her spine, fast and purposeful. Shinra froze. Whispercoil had never faltered, never deviated, never acted without omen. The perfumed smoke grew dense around her. The jade chime sang discordantly. Then the serpent stopped directly beneath her ear. The archivist's blood chilled. A faint hiss echoed in the back of his skull, imagined or not. He forced his eyes back to the narrative. Whispercoil's tongue brushed her neck. Its body tightened, and instead of revealing a message from the ancestors, it whispered. The archivist's torch flickered violently. His pupils constricted. Whispered? He leaned closer to read. Shinra did not reveal what Whispercoil said, but witnesses reported that her eyes widened, her breath stopped, and the serpent scales dulled instantly, as though it had aged decades and seconds. It fell from her shoulders. Dead. A carved depiction on the next page showed Shinra kneeling beside Whispercoil's lifeless body, jade paint smeared across her arms, eyes wide and hollow. A line beneath the image read, "Serpents do not die during rituals, unless something far older than ancestors speaks through them." The archivist swallowed hard. Something older. Something deeper. The next paragraph described the aftermath. Shinra ended the ritual immediately, but the message, whatever it was, clung to her. She ceased speaking to her ministers. She refused audiences. She stayed within the jade chamber for 7 days, repainting her body in fresh spirals each morning. But serpents refused to approach her. They hissed at her shadow. They recoiled at her presence. They slithered away as if from fire. Shinra had been marked. The archivist wiped the sweat gathering across his brow. The vault felt too hot now. The air tasted metallic. He forced himself to read the final section. The last ritual of the listener. The next stone leaf showed the chamber's curtains flowing as though tossed by unseen wind. The perfume chimes were silent. The jade bowls overturned. Serpents coiled tightly in the corners, watching. Shinra stood alone in the center, body fully painted, waiting. On the 8th night after Whispercoil's death, Shinra performed the ritual alone. She did not ring the jade chimes. She did not release the serpents. She did not call upon ancestors. She waited for whatever had spoken. The archivist's chest tightened. He read slowly. Witnesses outside the chamber reported hearing no chanting, no movement, no sound at all, until the serpents began to scream. The archivist flinched as his torch sputtered. Serpents do not scream, but their hisses rose into a shrill, piercing wail that shook the curtain from their hooks. The chamber door burst open. Shinra was gone. The archivist stared at the stone. Another line below. Only the jade paint remained, dripping across the floor in spirals that moved long after they should have dried. He let out a slow, trembling breath. He turned the final page. The archivist and the jade whisper. The last slab held only one short passage. Those who read this chapter must beware the whisper beneath thought. The serpents hear more than the ancestors. They hear you. If jade grows warm beneath your touch, close the book. If it grows cold, run. The archivist snatched his hand back. The jade slab was no longer warm. It was freezing. A hiss curled through the vault. Soft, deliberate, close. Too close. The archivist turned slowly, torch trembling in his grip. Behind him, in the darkness, something moved. Something low. Something smooth. Something coiling. He stepped back toward the codex without thinking, breath sharp and shallow. A whisper brushed the shell of his ear, like scales against stone. The archivist froze. He didn't dare turn around. Didn't dare breathe. Didn't dare blink. The whisper came again. Not a voice, not a word, but a question shape, curling into his mind like smoke entering a sealed room. His torch sputtered, extinguished. Darkness flooded the vault. The whisper slithered deeper, and Section 5 ended. The archivist felt at the moment he laid his hand upon the next slab. The jade warmth vanished. In its place came a dense, suffocating chill, metallic, dry, and absolute, as though he had plunged his fingers into a coffin made of iron. The codex no longer felt like stone or jade. It felt forged, as if it had been hammered into shape. He exhaled, breath fogging in the air despite the vault's sealed stillness. A low hum vibrated through the codex, steady, rhythmic, methodical. The archivist recognized the pulse before he recognized the pattern. Hammer strikes. 3 slow beats. A pause. 1 long ringing blow. Repeat. Smith rhythm. War rhythm. Binding rhythm. His pulse stuttered. He leaned in, torch flickering violently as the next chapter revealed itself in stark, matte black carvings. The Iron King and his golem bride. The archivist hesitated. The letters were not carved. They were pressed, as if some immense weight had stamped them into the slab while it was still molten. He smelled soot. He smelled scorched fabric. And beneath those, impossibly, cold breath, he swallowed and began to read. The Forged Monarch. In the high reaches of the Winterforge peaks, where snow hissed against slag-heated vents, the Iron King ruled a kingdom born of metal, soot, and furnace light. His throne was not carved. It was cast. His crown was not fashioned from gold. It was hammered from black iron ore, cooled in water drawn from the glacier known as the Sleeping Vein. Such iron was believed to drink the soul's heat, tempering it. The archivist's fingertips tingled. Iron that drinks heat. Every monarch of the iron line bound themselves not through marriage, nor alliance, but through forging. They slept not beside a consort of flesh, but beside a crafted simulacrum, a golem made from metal, shaped in their own images opposite. The so-called golem bride. The archivist felt a slow tightening in his chest. He turned the page. The shape beside the throne. The next carved depiction sent a reluctant shiver across his shoulders. The Iron King, broad-shouldered, gaunt-faced, crowned with jagged steel, stood beside a figure made entirely of iron plates and articulated joints. The golem's face was smooth, expressionless, a mask with no eyes yet endless shadow behind the sculpted lids. Its limbs were slender, elegant, constructed with impossible delicacy for a creation of iron. Its torso bore embedded patterns of ancient sigils, lines that swirled like frost crystallizing on glass. The golem bride did not live, but she watched. She did not breathe, but she listened. She did not walk, not unless the ritual demanded it. The archivist lingered on the imagery, iron limbs arranged like a dancer's, head tilted toward the king with an eternal, unblinking poise. She was not shaped crudely. She was shaped beautifully. Deliberately, with precision meant to mimic grace. He read the caption beneath. Bound in iron, the king's soul cannot flee. His throat tightened. He kept reading. Rite 15, the furnace vows. Before the Iron King could share his chamber with the Golem Bride, he first had to forge a part of himself. Literally, the archivist blinked. He leaned closer. Each monarch took a fragment of their own blood, heated it in the sacred crucible known as a heart hollow until it cracked into black dust. That dust was then mixed into molten iron and hammered into shape. This fragment became part of the golem. Thus, the king's soul threaded the creature's joints. The archivist wiped moisture from his forehead despite the cold. The next lines carved themselves deeper into his mind and into the stone. At night, this soul thread returned to the king in dreams, binding him to the iron figure that lay beside him. Without the golem, his dreams scattered. Without his dreams, the Iron King lost pieces of himself. The archivist's stomach dropped. A monarch whose sanity depended upon sleeping beside a construct. He turned the page. The Chamber of Iron Silence. A detailed carving revealed the Iron King's bedchamber, an enormous room of forged walls, riveted beams, and a ceiling hung with heavy iron chains that glowed faintly red from ever-burning coal pockets. The chamber was soundless. No footsteps echoed. No wind seeped through cracks. The room devoured sound the way other rooms devoured smoke. The Golem Bride stood in her alcove by day, her metal body faintly reflecting the firelight. At night, she lay beside the king on a slab-like bed of hammered steel. The archivist stared at the depiction, its stark geometry, its oppressive symmetry, its perfect order. No softness, no warmth, no comfort. Yet the sensual tension lay in the contrast, the icy closeness of metal meeting skin, the rigid shaped line where a living form might lie, the silence so absolute that breath alone sounded like intrusion. The archivist read on. The hammering rhythms. The next slab vibrated faintly beneath the archivist's fingers. Not metaphor. Actually, vibrated. He drew back quickly. Then, cautiously, he tilted the torch and continued reading. Each night, before lying beside the Golem Bride, the Iron King performed the hammering rite. He struck the forge anvil with a rhythm known only to the monarchs of the Iron Line. 3 slow beats. A pause. 1 long ringing blow. The archivist's breath caught. The same rhythm humming through the vault now. The hammering summoned the soul thread within the golem, waking it without animating it fully. The iron body warmed, not to life, but to attention. When the king finally lay beside it, the golem's metal cooled in response to his heat. A balance of opposites. Cold metal, warm flesh. A strange kind of intimacy woven from contrast rather than closeness. The archivist's pulse tightened. He turned the page. Whispered iron incantations. The next depiction showed the king leaning toward the golem, his breath fogging against its metal cheek. After hammering, the king whispered the iron tongue, words carved from ancient smith lore, believed to shape thought the way a hammer shapes metal. These incantations threaded themselves through the golem's body and into the king's dreams. The whispering continued until the king felt the metal shift in response. Only then did sleep begin. The archivist imagined it, the king murmuring to a motionless forged figure, his voice low, rhythmic, measured like blows upon an anvil, breath chilling upon unyielding iron. He swallowed. The next paragraph darkened. If the incantations faltered, the golem did not sleep. If the golem did not sleep, neither did the king. And if both remained awake too long, the soul thread thinned. Thin threads can break. The archivist felt faint. He steadied himself on the vault wall before reading on. Dream reactions. The next carved image chilled him, the Iron King lying stiffly beside the golem, eyes closed, while the golem's iron fingers twitched, slightly, subtly, responding to something unseen. Though the Golem Bride never moved while awake, it reacted in dreams. The iron limbs curled or uncurled according to the king's thoughts. If he dreamed of fear, its fingers tightened. If he dreamed of sorrow, its head tilted toward him. If he dreamed of desire, its iron warmed faintly, pulsing with ember-red veins. The archivist exhaled shakily. This was the coldest ritual yet. Sensual in symbolism, clinical in execution, intimate only because intimacy was forbidden. He kept reading. Night of the first reaction. Not all movements were benign. The Iron King of the Seventh Forge experienced the first known irregular reaction. The archivist leaned in. During his 33rd night beside the Golem Bride, he dreamed of the Forge Light War, a battle he barely survived. In the dream, he relived the ambush that nearly cleaved his skull. But when he woke, the archivist felt dread building before he read the next line. He found the golem's palm pressed to the very spot on his head where the axe would have struck, not animated while awake. Yet its position was unmistakable. Witnesses reported that the mark of iron burned faintly on his skin. The archivist ran his fingers along his temple instinctively. He read on, deepening reactions. The next page depicted the Iron King waking with the golem's fingers wrapped around his wrist as though restraining him. Over time, the Golem Bride began reacting more strongly to the king's dreams. When he dreamed of grief, it placed its head over his heart. When he dreamed of violence, its arms stiffened at his sides. When he dreamed of abandonment, the golem's body arched toward him, though it could not move while conscious. The archivist shuddered. He imagined the Iron King waking in the cold silence to find the iron form curled toward him like a sleeping lover. Carved lines revealed it with eerie precision, the emotionless metal shape mimicking closeness with uncanny fidelity. He turned the stone. The next section chilled even further. Out-of-rhythm movement. Just as the serpents had their omen patterns, the golem had its forging rhythms. When it moved out of those rhythms, danger followed. If the golem twitched without dream cause, the king's soul thread was fraying. If its iron plate shifted unbidden, the king's mind was drifting from his body. If the golem's head turned while the king was awake, the bond was breaking. No monarch survived a broken bond. The archivist felt something cold trace his spine. He wasn't sure it was imagination. He tightened his grip on the torch and continued. Historical account, the night of rending dreams. During the reign of Iron King Maluth, the golem reacted violently for the first time. Maluth was a man plagued by nightmares, visions of molten iron swallowing his armies, of crumbling fortresses, of fire devouring the sky. One night, his dream grew so intense that the golem's entire body shuddered. Witnesses outside the chamber reported hearing a sound like metal bending under tremendous force. The archivist tasted iron in the air. He kept reading. When Maluth woke, the golem stood beside the bed, standing, facing him. The archivist's heart hammered. One hand reached toward him, not in violence, not in gentleness, but in something like recognition, something inhuman. The next image showed the Iron King seated upright, blankets fallen aside, staring at a golem whose head was tilted as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. A single line beneath the carving read, "The golem was dreaming him." The archivist's throat closed. He forced the next page over. Consequences of soul thread strain. This slab was cracked, not from mishandling, but woven into the carving itself, as though the very content fractured the stone. When the golem began dreaming of the king, the roles reversed. Instead of the king binding the golem began binding the king. He slept longer each night, woke slower, felt his limbs heavier, as if metal seeped into his bones. Over weeks, Maluth's skin cooled. His breath grew faint. His voice deepened with a hollow timbre of an echo through steel. The golem was becoming king. The king was becoming golem. The archivist felt a tremor crawl up his arms. The next line shook him worse. The transition is irreversible once begun. He exhaled unsteadily, turned the page. The last forge rite of Maluth. The final depiction of Maluth was the most horrific yet. He stood in the ritual chamber, shoulders rigid, skin mottled gray, fingers stiffened, expression hollow. The golem stood opposite him, alive now with subtle warping heat, red veins of iron glowing faintly beneath the metal plates. Between them, the hammer lay untouched. The king attempted to perform the hammering rite to reassert dominance, but when he raised the hammer, his arm froze midair. The golem moved, not violently, quietly, inevitably. It placed its hand over the king's chest, mirroring the gesture it once used to soothe him in dreams. The king's heart stilled. The golem breathed. The archivist stared, stunned. The codex continued. From that night onward, the golem sat upon the throne, It did not move. It did not speak. But its iron face remained turned toward the bedchamber door, as though waiting for a king who would never return. The archivist felt the vault's cold deepen. His breath fogged. He turned the last page. Warning to the reader. The final passage was short, crisp, and sharp as a blade. If you hear the hammering, do not answer it. If iron cools too quickly beneath your hand, do not linger. And if a metal shape ever shares your dreams, wake immediately. The archivist lowered his hand from the slab. His torch dimmed. Somewhere in the vault, metal creaked. Slowly, deliberately, as if something heavy and cold had shifted just behind him. The archivist did not turn. He felt it anyway. A presence. Unmoving. Silent. Patient. Watching. The whisper of iron breath touched the back of his neck. And the section ended. Humidity rolled through the vault like a breath. The archivist froze. For hours, or what felt like hours, he had endured iron-frozen lungs, cold chambers, and the metallic stillness of the Golden Bride. But now the air rippled warm. Damp, heavy. The faint scent of crushed petals drifted upward from the codex, growing richer with every second. When he brushed dust from the next carved slab, color returned to the stone, not paint, not pigment, but an illusion. Soft pinks, lush greens, deep violets shimmering in the torch flicker as though blooming beneath his touch. The stone felt warm, alive, dangerously alive. He inhaled, and quickly regretted it. The scent was intoxicating, dizzying, as if he had inhaled a memory rather than air. The slab's title revealed itself, letters unfurling like petals opening at dusk. The Orchid Emperor's Perfumed Night. The archivist's fingertips tingled. He steadied his breath, too late, and began to read. The luminous realm of the Orchid Emperor. In the rainforest empire for all, where waterfalls groaned with the weight of endless rain and canopy shadows shifted like living creatures, reigned the Orchid Emperor, the ruler whose night shaped the prosperity of the realm. His palace was a living garden. Vines crept through marble cracks, moss lined the stays, and orchid-bloomed chandeliers shed phosphorescent light onto every ritual chamber. The archivist had seen maps of this empire, humid jungles, dense river paths, and flowers said to bloom only under blood-red moonlight. But he had never imagined a palace alive. The emperor's rites were not kept in vaults of stone, but in vaults of fragrance, dream, and hallucination. No monarch of the orchid line ruled without surrendering themselves to the perfumed night. The archivist felt tendrils of scent curling around him, subtle at first, then richer, notes of jasmine, crushed orchid petals, sap, and something darker beneath. A narcotic must have threatened to pull thoughts apart. He turned the page. The perfumed chamber. A full relief carving spread across the slab, lush detail so vivid he nearly believed the vines would ripple in the torchlight. The perfumed chamber lay deep within the palace heart, a room constructed not from stone but from petrified wood, its walls knotted with natural hollows filled with sacred flowers. At night, lanterns carved from hollow blossoms glowed with honeyed luminescence, dripping faint trails of fragrance. The carving showed a bed draped in translucent fabrics resembling pale orchid petals, attendants kneeling at the perimeter with scrolls and ink, vaporous tendrils drifting upward from bowls placed around the emperor. The archivist exhaled slowly. Even the carved vapor seemed to coil. Right, too, the flower breath. Before any visions began, the emperor inhaled the breath blossom, a rare orchid whose petals opened only when touched by warm skin. When cupped between the emperor's hands, the blossom unfurled, releasing a ribbon of fragrant mist that entered the lungs and stirred the dreaming mind while still awake. Attendants carved in the slab wore veils soaked in counter-fragrance to avoid collapsing into dreams themselves. The breath taken from the flower softened the boundary between memory and illusion. From this moment on, anything seen, heard, or felt in the perfumed chamber might belong to the ritual or to the emperor's unraveling past. The archivist focused, forcing clarity. The scent from the codex thickened, pooling in the air. His gaze wavered. He blinked hard and continued reading. Attendants of the scented night. The next slab depicted four attendants kneeling at the chamber's edges, scrolls unrolled, brushes suspended in readiness. The attendants of the perfumed night were trained from childhood to read the emperor's visions. Their purpose was not mere transcription, but interpretation. Each gesture, each whispered word, each apparition emerging in the scented haze was an omen. They witnessed the illusions, yet were forbidden from reacting. Emotion might alter the emperor's vision. Reaction might shape the dream. The archivist imagined kneeling there, breath held behind a veil, ink trembling on parchment, waiting for hallucinations to drift between lanterns and shadows. He read on, "The Emperor and the Flower Cloak." In the next carving, the Emperor reclined upon the petal-draped bed, his body adorned with a cloak made entirely from orchid petals, each petal sewn onto a fine net of spider silk that clung gently to the skin, moving like fractal wings each time he breathed. The flower cloak signified surrender. Once worn, the Emperor became open to the visions, vulnerable, impressionable, and unable to fully distinguish illusion from omen. Each petal contained a trace of the hallucinogenic oils, deepening his sensitivity to scent, sound, and memory. The archivist brushed the carved cloak lightly. It shimmered beneath his torch, as though still moist with dew. He swallowed, the first apparition of the perfumed night. As the incense burned low and the breath blossom's influence deepened, the first apparitions appeared. Not spirits, not hallucinations, but something in between. The carving depicted a faint figure standing beside the Emperor's bed, blurred, half-formed, with hair that dissolved into petals and eyes that reflected starlight. These apparitions often resembled people the Emperor had known, lovers, rivals, ancestors, sometimes even enemies long dead. They whispered truths or lies, sometimes both. The Emperor was required to respond without hesitation. The archivist frowned. Any delay, any doubt, weakened the growing vision and risked drawing the Emperor into a false memory, where he could wander for hours or days while his body lay unmoving. A vivid shiver went through him. He turned the page. The chamber breathes. This carving unsettled him more than any yet. It showed the perfumed chamber swelling, walls expanding and contracting like the ribcage of some slumbering creature. Fragrance coiled from hidden vents, overlaying the room in ribbons of drifting vapor. During the rites, the chamber itself seemed to breathe. It was believed the jungle outside pressed against the walls, watching the ritual unfold. Its vines slipped into it with grain to listen. In truth, the breathing was a blooming of thousands of micro-orchids embedded in the walls, each releasing tiny bursts of fragrance in phases. The archivist ran his thumb over the textured carving. The walls looked like lungs. He turned the slab. Rite of echoed memory. Once the Emperor entered the dream state, the attendants began their role. They echoed his actions in miniature. The carving showed the Emperor lifting a hand, while 4 attendants lifted theirs simultaneously. This gesture mirroring amplified the vision, turning solitary hallucination into shared omen. A memory spoken by the Emperor became prophecy. A gesture became a directive. A hallucinated figure became counsel. The archivist imagined being one of those attendants, trying to mirror without knowing which gestures belonged to the Emperor and which belonged to illusions drifting around him. He read on, "The Emperor's Visions, a Chronicle of Fragrance." The next slab displayed 6 scenes, layered and interwoven. Orchids bursting open midair, rivers flowing upside down across the chamber ceiling. A woman formed entirely from petals reaching toward the Emperor. A serpent uncoiling from a bloom with eyes of glistening ink. Children walking across sheets of water suspended like floating mirrors. All visions, all omens, all recorded. These visions shaped the year's governance. If the Emperor saw water rising, the river gates opened. If he saw fire blooming, the harvest festival adjusted. If he saw the face of a deceased general, the army's formation shifted. The realm lived according to dream. The archivist exhaled. Dream as law. He turned the page. Dangers of the perfumed night. The perfumed night offered truth, but also danger. The next carving showed the Emperor sinking deeper into the bed, petals drifting from the flower cloak as if falling into a whirlpool. Layers of reality thinned. The Emperor might become lost in a vision that mimicked memory so closely even the attendants doubted its nature. If an apparition embraced him, he might feel warmth where none existed. If a long-dead lover whispered to him, He might forget the present entirely. The archivist felt a pressure building around his temples, the scent in the vault thickening. He forced himself on. Apparitions gaining shape. The next slab startled him. It showed an apparition reaching toward the attendants, its fingers brushing the veil of one recorder. As the vision strengthened, apparitions sometimes gained partial physicality. A hand might disturb fabric. A foot might leave a faint imprint on the orchid-strewn floor. Such moments were recorded with tremors in the attendant's handwriting, ink blotted, lines wavering. The archivist imagined ink trembling from attendant hands as a dream figure passed too close. He swallowed and continued. Ritual of the lingering petal. This rite captured the archivist, pulling him into its imagery. One of the most crucial parts of the perfumed night was a lingering petal. Near the end of each ritual, a single orchid petal landed upon the emperor's chest. Where it fell determined the omen. The carving displayed petals drifting from above in slow, spiraling arcs. If it fell near the heart, an omen of personal transformation. If upon the throat, a year withheld truth. If upon the stomach, upheaval in the realm. If upon the emperor's lips, an omen too complex to interpret lightly, requiring 7 nights of additional visions. The archivist noticed another carving beneath, a petal landing upon the emperor's closed eyelid. The caption read, "If upon the eye, a warning. Something the emperor sees will betray him." The archivist's pulse quickened. He turned the slab carefully. The night of thousand-flower fracture. The next passage was longer, carved deeper, the scent around the slab sharp and intoxicating. The most infamous perfumed night belonged to Emperor Virandal, the orchid emperor whose visions nearly tore the realm apart. On this night, the breath blossom split open prematurely, releasing an overwhelming cloud of intoxicant. The emperor inhaled too deeply. The attendants struggled to keep their minds stable behind their veils. The visions came all at once. The carvings were chaotic, orchid vines bursting through the floor, spectral figures crowding the chamber. Rivers of scent twisting into serpentine shapes, memories shattering like glass. Virandal cried out in longing, then in grief, then in laughter, then in fear, all moments overlapping. Attendants recorded impossible contradictions, battles that never happened, romances that defied time, ancestors appearing and dissolving within breaths. The archivist breathed shallowly, afraid to inhale too deeply. He continued. Breaking of the flower cloak. The next carving displayed the emperor clawing at the cloak as petals dissolved against the skin. As the hallucinogenic influence surged, the flower cloak adhered to Virandal's body, melting into his skin like liquid petal flesh. The boundary between flesh and blossom blurred. The apparitions touched him now, not faintly, but fully. The relief showed shadowy figures crowded around the emperor, hands on his shoulders, chest, forehead, guiding him deeper, deeper. But the caption chilled him. The apparitions were not spirits. They were constructs of his own fracturing memory, given momentary form by the overwhelming fragrance. The archivist steadied himself. The vault's air tasted faintly floral now. He read on. The apparition of the river-born woman. One apparition dominated the chaos, a woman formed from pale petals and glistening river water woven into a shape. Her hair cascaded like vines. Her eyes shimmered like polished jade. She stood at the emperor's bedside, impossible and yet present. Virandal reached toward her, believing her to be a memory of a youthful lover drowned long ago. In truth, she was a vision born from grief, shaped by the hallucinogenic flowers. When she placed her hand upon his chest, the emperor's heartbeat accelerated to a dangerous tempo. Attendants recorded the frantic rhythm, unsure whether omen or imminent collapse. The archivist felt the codex pulse faintly under his palm. He almost dropped it. The blooming of shadows. The final stage of the perfumed night involved the blooming of shadow orchids, flowers that opened in total darkness, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. During Virandal's thousand-flower fracture, these shadow flowers bloomed prematurely, crawling across the walls in twisting ribbons of darkness. When they opened, the chamber dimmed, and the apparitions gained sharper edges. The relief carved along the slab showed shadow flowers unfurling like ink blots. Some attendants claimed the shadows whispered warnings. Others claimed the shadows tried to enter their mouths, their ears, their eyes, seeking new vessels for vision. The archivist wiped sweat from his brow, though the vault was cool. The scent pressed heavier. He pushed forward. The collapse of vision and body. As Virandal's visions escalated, his body convulsed under the weight of conflicting realities. The carving depicted him arching backward on the bed, petals scattering like shards. He saw past, present, and future all at once. He spoke a dozen languages. He recited ancestral names alongside impossible knowledge. His veins glowed faint violet, the mark of orchid influence reaching the bloodstream. The attendants were torn between continuing the ritual or stopping it. Records show hesitation, ink blots, trembling strokes, broken characters. The archivist felt breathless. He continued. The final petal. The final petal of the night drifted downward in the carving, large, luminous, impossibly detailed. It did not land upon the emperor's chest, throat, stomach, lips, or eye. Instead, it fell upon the palm of the apparition, the river-born woman. The archivist's heart lurched. A new omen, a terrible omen. When a petal lands not upon the emperor but upon an apparition, it signifies the emperor has surrendered too much of himself. The vision has become stronger than the man. The apparition closed its fingers around the petal and vanished, taking something of Virandal with it. Attendants recorded that the emperor gasped, a sound of grief so profound it silenced the chamber. He whispered, "She knows my name." Seconds later, he collapsed. Aftermath, the emperor who no longer dreamed. Virandal survived, but never dreamed again. The perfumed night had taken that part of him. His visions, though written across dozens of scrolls, grew meaningless without his dreaming mind to interpret them. The realm faltered. The perfumed chamber sealed itself, vines curling across the door of their own accord. No emperor ever entered it again. Not alive, warning of fragrance. The final carved lines tightened the archivist's chest. If the scent calls to you, do not inhale deeply. If petals fall where none should fall, do not follow them. If you see someone you lost within the drifting vapors, it is not them. The archivist exhaled, breath shaking. The scent around him lifted slightly, but not fully. As he lowered his hand from the slab, something soft brushed the back of his wrist. He looked down. A petal. Small, pale, fresh. He had not imagined it. He stared at it for a long moment. The vault air held its breath with him. Then, from somewhere deep within the dark, humid corridor behind him, a whisper, a voice shaped from mist and memory, calling his name. The archivist did not immediately notice the cold. He felt it first as a subtle pressure behind the eyes, a quiet tightening of the skull, as though some unseen force pulled his thoughts toward a distant, pale horizon. Only when his breath shuddered visibly through the torchlight did he register the temperature's collapse. The humid fragrance of orchids vanished. In its place, a crisp, biting stillness. Ice without moisture, cold without mercy, light without warmth. The torch dimmed, shrinking into a thin blue flame. The next slab of the codex glowed faintly before he even touched it, soft as frostlit stone beneath moonrise. Its carvings shimmered with a sheen like crushed silver dust. The archivist's fingertips trembled when he set them upon the surface. A faint hum radiated into his bones, high-pitched, distant, mournful. A sound like a winter wind threading through a deserted temple. The title revealed itself slowly, each letter brightening like moonflowers blooming under midnight. The King Who Married the Moon. The archivist shivered once, not entirely from cold, and read, "The Celestial Kingdom of High Maressa." In the solitary mountains of High Maressa, where peaks glistened like polished blade edges and the air thinned with quiet reverence, there lived a king whose rule was tethered not to earth nor bloodline, but to the moon itself. His people called him the Lunar Regent, the silver-bound king, the one who wed the sky. His reign was shaped by cycles, not of seasons, not of time, but of light. The archivist felt the vault's cold intensify as though the very moon shifted overhead, though he stood deep underground. He clenched his jaw and continued. marriage to the celestial bride. The next carving depicted the king kneeling upon a circular dais of silver stone, his head bowed. In front of him stood a figure shrouded in translucent veils that shimmered with pale luminescence. Each ruler of High Maressa performed the bridal rite upon ascension, wed not to a person, but to the moon's chosen vessel. This vessel could take the form of a priestess, a dancer, a masked oracle, or even a silent figure clad entirely in silver dust. The chosen companion embodied the moon's presence in flesh. The king did not choose the lunar companion. The moon chose. The archivist traced the carved figure's outlines, slender, ethereal, veiled so heavily that only the faint curvature of form could be made out. The companion's face was hidden entirely, as though concealed beneath a mask of condensed moonlight. The archivist exhaled, breath shimmering in the cold air. The silver chamber of Nocturne. The next slab revealed the ritual chamber, the silver chamber of Nocturne. Its depiction stunned him. Walls carved from pale stone that glowed from within, not from torches or from mineral luminescence. The ceiling was a dome of reflective crystal, shaped to catch moonlight from an opening high above and scattered across the room in trembling rays. On the first night of each lunar cycle, the king and the moon's vessel entered the chamber. They closed the silver doors behind them. No attendant followed. No guard waited outside. Only the king and the chosen companion remained until dawn. What occurred inside was recorded only through echoes, shadows observed on the chamber's outer surfaces, sounds carried down corridors, and dreams experienced by the palace servants. The archivist inhaled sharply. Dreams experienced by servants? He read on, Rite of the Waning Veil. Each cycle began with a rite of the waning veil. The carving portrayed the king slowly lifting a veil from the moon's vessel, not fully removing it, but peeling back a layer so thin the slab barely captured it. The companion's layers of veils symbolized the phases of the moon. With each cycle, one veil was lifted, revealing a little more of the lunar presence. But never the face. The face of the moon is not for mortal eyes. A thin chill coiled along the arc of his spine. He wasn't sure whether the torchlight dimmed or if the slab brightened. He continued, Silver dust anointing. Next came a scene of ritual anointing. The king anointed the companion with silver dust, brushing it across arms, neck, and shoulders in lines that resembled constellations. The dust glowed faintly upon contact, mapping celestial patterns across the companion's skin. In return, the companion traced silver across the king's chest, marking him with the paths of lunar ascendance. The archivist felt the chill deepen as though cold powders settled on his own skin. He kept reading. Wind of the High Peaks. A carving displayed an aperture in the chamber wall opening to the mountaintop winds. Fabric and hair streamed sideways, caught in the night gale. At the height of the rite, the chamber opened to the mountain winds, cold currents sweeping through, extinguishing all mortal warmth. This wind represented the moon's breath. To endure it was to prove devotion. To falter invited nightmares. Nightmares. The archivist leaned closer. If the king shivered too violently or gasped too sharply, nightmares bled into waking life. They manifested as omens, visions, or distortions of memory, shaping the king's rule for the coming month. Some kings welcomed the nightmares. Others were consumed. The archivist felt his own breath tremble with the cold wind pressing through the vault's silence. He turned the slab. Visions reflected in silver. The crystal dome atop the chamber captured moonlight, bending it into reflections that moved across the room independent of the moon's position. The carving showed warped reflections. The king's silhouette fractured into multiple shapes. The moon's vessel appearing twice, once still, once moving. Shadows cast where no body stood. Shimmering forms crawling along the walls. These reflections were not illusions. They were lunar echoes, glimpses of possible futures, past or unrealities. The king was expected to interpret them, not aloud, but in posture and reaction. Each gesture received an answering movement from the companion, binding the omen into both their bodies. The archivist noted something subtle. In every depiction, the king appeared smaller than the light that surrounded him. Shadows swallowed human form. Light became the true ruler. He turned the page. The companion's silent roll. The lunar companion never spoke. The carving confirmed it. No mouth visible beneath the veils, no suggestion of sound. Their presence symbolized the moon's silence, the quiet influence that reshapes tides, seasons, and minds without uttering a word. Their gestures were minimal, slow, measured to the lunar phases. Yet their silence carried immense power. If the companion paused too long, the king interpreted it as disapproval. If the companion touched the king's chest, it signaled forthcoming upheaval. If the companion ever removed a veil unbidden, it was a sign of madness approaching. The archivist swallowed hard. He turned the neck slab. Night maze made flesh. The imagery here was darker, sharper lines, deeper carvings. When the king failed to withstand the lunar wind or misread a reflection's omen, night maze bled from dream into waking life. Shadows detached from bodies and stood still while their owners walked. Moonlight pooled on the floor and did not disperse for hours. Silver dust drifted in corners where no ritual had occurred. The archivist stared at the carvings, pools of light shaped like liquid, shadows clustering in corners like onlookers, eyes appearing in the glow dome's reflections. The king's rule grew erratic in these months, guided by night maze rather than visions. Some kings punished imaginary enemies. Others rewarded phantom advisors. One king spent a full season speaking only to the moonlight on his sleeve. The archivist fought a shiver. The vault flickered with pale light. He could swear the shadows near him shifted. He kept reading. The full moon rite, the night of radiant union. Once each cycle, during the full moon, the deepest ritual commenced, the night of radiant union. This was the most elaborate carving yet. The chamber filled with moonlight, flooding it like water. The king stood at the center, arms raised. The companion stood behind him, veiled completely, hands hovering near his shoulders without touching. During radiant union, the king surrendered fully to the moon's gaze. His mind opened. His thoughts dissolved into silver brightness. The companion guided him through visions too intense for mortal senses. Apparitions filled the chamber, shapes made entirely of light. A stag with antlers of broken moon. A figure holding a silver chain. A child whose eyes glowed like frost. A faceless dancer leaving trails of light. The companion pressed their forehead to the king's back, anchoring him to waking reality. Without this anchor, the king risked losing himself to lunar euphoria, ascending in mind and never returning to body. Ascension, a dangerous word. The archivist felt a strange tension in the air, as if something watched. He read on. Records of the lost kings. Some kings ascended. The archivist's breath hitched. He focused on the relief carvings showing kings whose bodies remained seated long after their minds had evaporated into moonlight. These kings did not die. They simply stopped, eyes open, breath shallow, faces turned toward the dome of light. Their minds drifted somewhere between waking and lunar realm. Their bodies remained warm. Their hearts beat softly. But they never spoke again. The archivist stared uneasily. Some kings were entombed sitting upright, faces lit eternally by silver lamps. Their companions stood beside them, veils unchanged. The archivist forced himself to turn the page. The companion's true nature. A chilling carving revealed the lunar companion standing alone in the chamber without the king, head lifted slightly, as though sensing the moon directly. Though the companion was mortal, it was said they were chosen for a reason. The moon sees itself in their spirit. Their silence is not absence of voice, but fullness of lunar presence. If the moon grows displeased with the king, the companion's movements shift. Their gestures sharpen. Their shadow lengthens unnaturally. On rare nights, a attendant outside the chamber reported hearing a second set of footsteps, light, soft, not belonging to either figure inside. The archivist felt his pulse skip. Footsteps where no one walked. He continued. The eclipse rite, the night of severing light. The most dreaded ritual was the eclipse rite. The slab showed a carving of the chamber in darkness, the moon fully obscured. During an eclipse, the chamber lost all silver glow. The king and the companion stood face to face in total darkness. The companion removed one veil, just one, revealing a sliver of lunar presence. Even that sliver was overwhelming. Most kings averted their eyes. One king did not. The archivist leaned closer. He stared directly at the unveiled portion. The moment moonlight touched his eyes, he screamed. His nightmares never returned to sleep. For 12 years he ruled without distinguishing between waking and dream. His kingdom suffered under visions that did not exist. The archivist felt the vault shift. The shadows along the floor elongated. He forced himself onward. The shivering monarch of the frostlit age. This section recounted the most infamous moon marriage. King Edireth, the shivering monarch, the man who loved the moon more than his own sanity. His story was carved with painful beauty. Edireth spent longer in the silver chamber than any king before him, sometimes entire nights beyond the rituals. His devotion deepened dangerously. He traced lunar maps on his arms with silver dust. He memorized every reflection in the dome. He listened for the moon's heartbeat in the companion's silence. On the night of Radiant Union, he did not anchor himself. The companion placed her hands upon his shoulders, but Edireth stepped forward into the full brilliance of moonlight. He whispered, "Take me." The archivist's stomach tightened. The carving showed Edireth dissolving into pale light, skin paling, eyes glowing like stars drowning in frost. But the companion, for the first time, the companion moved violently. They reached for him. They grasped his wrist. They pulled him back. The companion's hands burned where they touched him, burned by the moonlight flooding his body. The archivist felt the cold bite into his fingers. He turned the slab. Edireth's night maze break the realm. Edireth survived the ritual, but not intact. He woke screaming every morning. He walked through the palace as though sleepwalking, touching walls as if they were illusions. Sometimes he bowed to the moonlight cast upon the floor. Sometimes he whispered apologies to shadows. Nightmares crawled from his mind into the kingdom. Villagers reported. Silver silhouettes lurking at the edge of forests. Pale figures drifting through windows at night. Pools of light where people dream compulsively when stepping inside. Wolves howling in perfect imitation of human voices. The companion remained silent, veiled, watching him unravel. The archivist swallowed. He kept reading. The final moon marriage of Edireth. One night, during a crescent moon, Edireth entered the silver chamber alone. He brought no attendants, no guards, not even the companion. He stood beneath the dome and whispered, "Show me your true face." Something answered. Not the moon, not a companion, not human. The carving showed faint lines, barely etched, of a towering figure descending in silver radiance, shape impossible to define. No record describes what happened that night. Only that Edireth was found at dawn lying in the center of the chamber, silver dust fused to his skin, his eyes open and pale as bone. The companion was gone. Not dead, not dust, gone. Some said they ascended. Others said they dissolved. A few believed the moon reclaimed them. The archivist's hands shook. He turned the page. The silver warning. The final inscription on the slab glowed faintly, too faintly to be torchlight. Do not invite the moon into your dreams. Do not follow silver lights into darkness. If you see a veiled figure bathed in pale glow, do not lift the final veil. The archivist exhaled slowly. The vault's cold deepened to a neactic stillness. From the far end of the dark passage behind him, a soft sound, like bare feet on stone. Slow, measured, veiled footsteps. Approaching. He did not turn. The cold breath of moonlit air brushed the back of his neck, and the section ended. The archivist did not remember lowering the torch. One moment it burned in his hand, a thin blue flame quivering against the frost-taught air. The next, it lay beside his boot on the stone floor, rolling gently until it touched the base of a fallen pillar. He did not remember letting it fall. He did not remember kneeling. But he found himself already on the cold stone, the codex open before him like a lung carved from night, its pages breathing in silent, ancient rhythm. The vault was no longer merely cold. It had shifted into something lunar, dream-chilled, an air so thin and pale that it felt as if light itself had condensed around him. The torches mounted on the distant walls flickered with silver, not fire. That alone should have sent him fleeing. But the archivist had reached a state of descent, quiet, steady, inevitable. His mind had opened in ways his body had not yet noticed. His breath did not fog despite the cold. His heartbeat grew soft, as though muffled beneath cloth. He touched the next slab. It was darker than the others, obsidian veined with white. Carvings shimmered as if scraped by moonlit claws. The surface trembled faintly beneath his fingertips, like a distant pulse. A title appeared slowly, blooming through the stone. The 15 rituals revisited. He exhaled. He had counted 7 kings right so far. 7 monarchs. 7 knights. 7 dynasties. 7 symbols. But the codex spoke now of 15. The archivist swallowed a small, dry sound in the moon-thin air, and read. The archivist's realization. When a chronicler reads too deeply, the words begin reading him in return. It was not a warning. It was a statement. A simple truth carved across centuries. The archivist leaned closer, eyes narrowing at the subtle shift in tone. The codex had never spoken of scribes before, not directly, not intimately. Now it did. Every archivist who touched the night laws left traces upon the codex. Every breath against its pages stirred dormant rites. Every thought illuminated forgotten lines. And eventually, inevitably, every archivist began to descend. He felt something stir behind him. A draft? A whisper? A shadow finding new shape? He remained facing the slab. A return to the Desert Kings. The codex displayed a symbol, the curling spiral of breath used by the ancient desert monarchs. But where earlier the spiral had represented aflow, incense, and perfumed chambers, this depiction was darker, thicker, twisted slightly. Breath given, breath stolen, breath bound. The archivist felt the air shift in his throat. The rise and fall of his lungs became momentary burdens. He gasped softly, more from surprise and fear. The first ritual, the binding of breath. And with that phrase, the slab shifted. No, his vision shifted, and he saw the Desert Kings again, not as carvings, but flickering in the edges of the vault, shapes wrapped in heated wind, crowned in dunes that did not exist here. One king inhaled incense so thick it shimmered around him like wet light. The other king exhaled into the mouth of a clay effigy, sealing his night maze inside it. The archivist understood the symbol. Breath belonged not to kings, but to ritual. Breath was submission. And someone, or something, now listened for his own. He forced himself to breathe slowly and continued. The twin thrones emerged. A second symbol appeared, 2 circles touching at the edges, like mirrored moons, the mark of the co-ruling brothers of the Northern Empire. Only now the symbol was cracked. The second ritual, the mirror unbroken. But in the carving, the mirrors were broken. Fragments lay scattered across stone. Each shard reflected a different face of the same man. Some were smiling. Some were silent. Some screamed. The archivist blinked hard and saw movement at the edge of the vault, reflections where no reflective surface existed. A pale shimmer drifted across a broken column, as if light from an unseen mirror had passed over it. He rubbed his eyes. When he opened them, the shimmer remained. He turned back to the slab. The river lament. The next sigil rippled like carved water, the symbol of the wailing king. But this time, the ripple pulsed, like breath on water, like a lament whispered beneath stone. The third ritual, the sound that summons. The archivist heard it, faintly, something like a sigh drifting from the deeper vault, far beyond the codex. Water that wasn't there, a voice that did not belong to him. He froze, listening. A distant wail, long, stretched, thin, not human, not entirely river, something between. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the carvings were moving, so subtly that had he blinked, he would have missed it. The river lines flowed, the fabrics drifted, the lanterns swayed. He forced himself to read. Serpents in the veins of stone. A sinuous line curled across the slab. The serpent sigil of the Jade dynasty glimmered faintly with green veins. Only now it pulsed. The fourth ritual, the body as omen. Serpents slithered through the edges of his vision, illusory, shimmering like smoke, shedding scales made of dust. One serpent curled around the archivist's ankle. He jerked back, heart jolting. But the serpent vanished as quickly as it appeared, dissolving into the faintest trail of green light. He rubbed a hand across his face, trying to anchor himself. The codex waited, iron in silence. The fifth sigil rested heavily on the slab, an iron circle marked with hammer blows. The mark of the Iron King and his golem bride. But the iron circle was no longer still. It throbbed, pulsed, beat like a heart of metal. The fifth ritual, the soul bound in echo. The archivist felt the vibration through the stone beneath his knees, faint metallic tremors that echoed the distant hammer rhythms of the Iron King's chambers. He heard a heavy breath, not human, not golem, but something forged, something dreaming. He tried to pull his hand back from the codex. His fingers did not move. Stone held him. He steadied his breath. Perfumed night maze. The sixth symbol unfurled like a blooming flower, petals curling back, releasing faint aromatic whirls of scent. The Orchid Emperor's sigil. Except this carving released no fragrant dream. It exhaled a shadow. The sixth ritual, the vision chase. The archivist's vision blurred for a moment, colors swelling, lantern light drifting, the vault shadows stretching into orchid-shaped silhouettes. For half a second, he smelled humid jungle air. Not rotting, sweet, cloying, narcotic. He blinked. The scent vanished, but the hallucination lingered faintly in the edges of his sight. He pressed onward. The moon's final mark. The seventh sigil was the smallest. A circle, pure, silver, unbroken. The mark of the king who married the moon. Except this time, the symbol had a single crack, thin as hair, luminous as frost. The seventh ritual, the veil lifted. The archivist shuddered involuntarily. He felt a cold breath on the back of his neck, soft as silk, cold as mountain wind. He did not turn. He pressed his palm flat against the slab. The codex responded. A new line brightened beneath his touch. 7 kings, 7 rights, 7 echoes. But the night laws do not end at 7. They begin. The archivist stared. His lungs tightened. He whispered, voice dry, 15. The vault answered with silence. The hidden 8. A new symbol appeared, one completely unfamiliar. Twin crescents interlocked like jaws. The 8 ritual, the threshold of knowing. The carving depicted an archivist, not a king, kneeling beside the codex. The vault around him glowed faintly with symbols he could not yet read. The archivist's breath hitched. This was him, or someone who looked like him, or a figure representing every archivist who had ever read this far. He leaned so close his breath touched the slab. When the archivist reaches the 8th ritual, he becomes a vessel of interpretation. The codex reshapes itself to his mind. The vault mirrors his thoughts. The night laws awaken in him. He jerked back. The torch behind him sputtered, not from breeze, from something shifting the air. He stared warily at the darkness behind him, searching for movement. Nothing. Only silence. He forced himself to look back at the slab. The 9th ritual, the archivist's descent. A new title carved itself slowly, letters forming with cold, patient certainty. The 9th ritual, the descent. The archivist felt the floor drop beneath him, not literally, but perceptually, as though the vault elongated downward, pulling him deeper into its hollow throat. The codex explained, descent is not physical, it is perceptual. The archivist begins to experience visions echoing the king's rites. He breathes desert incense. He hears river laments. He sees serpent shadows. He feels iron pulse beneath stone. He smells orchids blooming in darkness. He sees moonlight where there is none. He closed his eyes. He saw all 7 visions at once. He opened them. The vault returned, but not entirely. The torchlight flickered with desert heat. Shadows curled like serpents. A faint hammering throbbed beneath the floor. A drifting orchid petal fell from nowhere. Moonlight touched his cheek. He gasped softly. The codex continued. The archivist must endure each echo without losing self. He pressed a hand to his chest. His heartbeat felt distant. The 10th ritual, the eye unveiled. A narrow slit appeared on the slab, like an opening eyelid. The 10th ritual, the eye unveiled. Vision surged through him, short, flickering, unnerving. A mirror cracking. A serpent staring directly at him. Silver dust swirling into a face he half recognized. A golem tilting its head as if hearing his breath. A lantern swinging over water, revealing nothing beneath. A man dissolving into moonlight. He clenched his teeth until the visions faded. His throat felt cold. He swallowed hard and read on. The 11th ritual, the vein of kings. A branching symbol like a tree root or a spreading crack. The 11th ritual, the vein of kings. Across cultures, across dynasties, across deserts, mountains, rivers, and jungles, the ritual shares a single origin, the night vein, an unseen force binding monarchs. And now, archivists. The archivist's fingers trembled. He felt veins of cold tracing along his forearm, imagined lines, yet startlingly real. He touched them. They disappeared. He exhaled shakily. The 12th ritual, the chamber without doors. The slab showed a room. Circular, featureless, silent. The 12th ritual, the chamber without doors. This chamber appears only to those who descend far enough into the night laws. It manifests in dreams first, then in waking vision. Then, if the archivist continues, the chamber appears in reality. The archivist looked around. The vault's far wall seemed closer than before, smoother, less carved. He blinked, and it returned to normal. He forced himself to face the codex again. The 13th ritual, the presence behind the veil. A tall figure carved in faint outline. No face. No identity. Veils like smoke. The 13th ritual, the presence behind the veil. At this stage, the archivist begins sensing the presence that guided each king. A figure veiled in shadow or light. A watcher. A silent companion. A lunar echo. A desert wind. A river shade. A serpent ancestor. An iron breath. An orchid vision. The presence will not harm the archivist, unless he turns to face it. The archivist froze. A breath, not his, shifted the air behind him. Soft, measured, slow. He did not turn. The 14th ritual, the breaking of time. A clock without hands. A moon split into phases simultaneously. The 14th ritual, the breaking of time. If the archivist reaches this point, past and present converge. Kings walk the vault. Visions bleed into stone. Echoes become solid. Time becomes reflective, like the dome of light. The archivist blinked and saw, for a heartbeat, the Desert King standing beside the Northern Brother, the River Monarch kneeling near the Iron King, the Orchid Emperor drifting like scent, the Lunar King watching silently, veiled companion at his side. He shut his eyes, opened them. They were gone. He continued. The 15th ritual, the archivist crowned. The final symbol was incomplete, just a circle with a downward stroke. The 15th ritual, the archivist crowned. His breath caught. This ritual involved him. He leaned closer. The archivist becomes a final monarch of the codex. His mind binds the night laws. His breath becomes a desert wind. His reflection becomes a twin throne. His lament touches a river. His veins echo serpents. His dreams forge iron. His visions bloom orchids. His silence marries the moon. He stared. Stone gleamed beneath his trembling hands. A final line carved itself into the slab. Once crowned, the archivist must choose, to close the codex, or to complete it. A breath touched his neck, cold, steady, waiting. He did not turn. He whispered, "And if I complete it?" The vault answered with silence, not absence, expectation. The archivist's descent had only begun. The archivist no longer felt the floor beneath his knees. He knew the stone was still there, cold, ancient, etched by hands long dead, but sensation had thinned to a pale ribbon around him, distant and fragile. The vault's air had grown so light it barely clung to existence. The torch behind him, once flickering blue, now emitted only a faint silver glow, as though reluctant to disturb the darkness becoming sovereign. The codex lay open, and he was not merely reading it now. He was participating in it. The 15th ritual glimmered across the slab in lines like skeletal moonbeams. The carvings shifted in soft pulses, as if breathing. The archivist's fingertips tingled, first with cold, then with warmth, then with something neither temperature nor sensation could contain. He whispered, voice faint, "I have reached the end." But the codex did not answer. The vault did. A low tremor traveled through the floor, subtle but immense, as though the mountain above had inhaled. Dust drifted from the ceiling in silver motes, drifting down like falling stars. The torchlight elongated into thin, luminous threads. He pressed his hand flat to the slab. The codex reacted immediately. Its pages did not turn. They unfolded, stone bending like fabric, layers peeling back in fluid, impossible movement. The archivist should have recoiled. Instead, he watched, breath quiet and steady, as the stone codex revealed what no archivist before him had survived to read. The ritual that devoured the other 15. The crown that devours the night. The codex opens its final mouth. The unfolding slabs formed a circle, 15 pages surrounding a central core that had been sealed for centuries. In the center, a cavity emerged, like a hollow sternum carved into the stone, glowing faintly. A title etched itself onto the inner surface, The Night-Crowned Archivist. The archivist's heartbeat slowed, not erratic, not frightened, simply synchronizing with the vault's pulse. Each slab, the 7 rituals of kings, the 7 rituals of archivists, tilted toward the center, as if gravity had reorganized itself around the codex. Carvings brightened, symbols connecting like constellations stitching a new sky. The archivist leaned forward, breath steady despite the cold pressing against his ribs. He felt the shift before he saw it. A presence stood behind him, not touching, not breathing, but waiting. He did not turn. Turning was forbidden until the ritual commanded it. Instead, he read the first line of the final section. When the codex opens its heart, the archivist must decide whether he is a recorder or a participant. The 15th ritual cannot be witnessed. It must be enacted. His throat tightened. The vault pressed closer. He read on. The ritual of completion. The carving showed a solitary figure, an archivist, kneeling in a circle of stone. Around him, the symbols of all previous rites rotated in slow orbit. Breath spirals of the desert kings, mirrored circles of the northern thrones, water ripples from the river chamber, serpentine coils of jade wisdom, iron rings vibrating with dull heat, the drifting orchid petals of perfumed visions, the silver moon circle, cracked but luminous. All of them converged, not as separate meanings, as parts of one body. The truth of the rituals is not in their differences, but their unity. Each king played a single note in a symphony older than history, each rite a fragment, each symbol an incomplete sentence. Only the archivist reads them whole. The archivist's fingers trembled slightly, not in fear, in recognition. Everything he had studied, every dynasty he catalogued, every whispered rumor about kings who bent the night, none were isolated. They were spokes on the same wheel, shadows cast from the same moon, echoes of the same pulse. He leaned closer. The carvings deepened. To complete the codex, the archivist must bind all 15 rites into one. He must enact a ritual that surpasses kings and outlasts empires. He whispered, "What is that ritual?" And the codex answered, "The crown that devours the night." A new carving emerged, slow and deliberate. A crown, not made of gold, not of silver, not of jewels, but of darkness shaped into form. Its ridges curved like crescent moons. Its points shimmered with edges of shadow. Its band glowed faintly, as though lit from within by starlight trapped beneath stone. It was beautiful, and dreadful, and inevitable. The crown is not worn. The crown chooses. The archivist's breath caught. Something moved at the edge of the vault, a soft distortion in the air. The presence behind him shifted one step closer. The sound was barely audible, but the stone beneath him throbbed in faint recognition. The codex continued. When the archivist reaches a final page, the crown senses him. It recognizes a mind that has unraveled the night laws. It recognizes a voice that has whispered their truths. It recognizes a breath that has echoed 15 kings. And it descends. The archivist felt a weight, not physical, but perceptual, gathering above him, like a shadow preparing to kneel. He inhaled one slow breath. He read the next line. Do not lift your eyes until the crown speaks. He kept them lowered. The vault responds. The air shuddered. Not wind, not motion. A vibration moving through reality itself. The torch went out. The vault turned perfectly black. But the codex glowed, cold, pale, radiant from within. Its carvings cast trembling patterns across the vault like broken constellations. Each symbol pulsed. Breath, mirror, river, serpent, iron, orchid, moon, dream, shadow, reflection, vision, vein, presence, time, crown. 15 lights, 15 pulses, 15 ancient voices humming in unison. The archivist closed his eyes. Darkness did not change. He opened them again. The presence behind him breathed, quiet, steady, waiting. He read the next line. Now the archivist must speak the chain unbroken. He exhaled slowly and pressed both palms to the slab. The stone felt warm, alive. He whispered the first word engraved beneath his hands. Breath. The vault inhaled. A rush of heated wind circled him, thick with incense. His chest tightened with the same sacred air once drawn by desert kings. The vault grew hotter until sweat collected at his hairline. He whispered the second word. Reflection. Cold swept across his skin. Mirrors he could not see formed around him. He felt his own breath bouncing back in echoes. Shadows flickered. The third. Lament. A long wail drifted from the deeper vault. The fourth. Serpent. Something coiled across the floor, brushing past his knee. He did not move. The fifth. Iron. A vibration deepened beneath him, hammer rhythms echoing from the bones of the mountain. The sixth. Orchid. Narcotic sweetness enveloped him, humid and blooming. The seventh. Moon. Light touched his cheek, cold, pure, absolute. The presence behind him leaned closer. The chain continued, 8 through 15, each word falling from his lips and breath steady and ritual-bound. Threshold. Descent. Eye. Vein. Chamber. Presence. Time. Crown. Each word reshaped the vault. Each symbol glowed, blurring into one another until a single form emerged, a shape hovering just above him. A crown, black as infinite night, luminous as moonlit frost, silent as a veiled companion, shifting as serpent movement, pulsing with iron rhythm, breathing desert incense, glowing orchid sweet, reflecting kings whose shadows crossed empires, alive, watching, choosing. He kept his eyes lowered. The codex's final line brightened. The crown devours the night by devouring the mind that sees it fully. He swallowed. The vault waited. The archivist chooses. The codex revealed 2 sentences, faint at first, then clear. If the archivist closes a codex, the crown will depart. The vault will sleep again. The night laws will wait for another reader. He stared at that line. It felt possible, simple, survivable. Then the second line emerged. If the archivist completes a codex, the crown will claim him. The night laws will gain a new king. The archivist will become the 15th ritual. His hands trembled, not from fear, from certainty. He looked at the carvings encircling him. 15 histories of power, devotion, nightmare, transformation. He felt the presence behind him, silent, patient, nearly touching his back. He sensed the crown above, hovering, weightless but immense. He whispered, I am not a king. The codex answered immediately. A king is a reader who understands too much. His pulse steadied. He inhaled once. Then slowly, carefully, he lifted his eyes. The crowning. He did not see the vault. He did not see stone. He did not see shadow. He saw night itself. Night with shape, night with purpose, night with eyes, night with a silent mouth carved from moonlight. The crown hovered inches above him. Its edges curled like crescent moons. Its interior glowed with shifting symbols. Its form was neither metal nor shadow, but a substance that devoured light and returned it changed. It lowered, slowly, steadily, deliberately, ritualistic. The vault lit with trembling visions, every king performing every rite in every age, all converging upon a single point, him. The crown touched his forehead. The vault went silent. Then everything ignited, not in flame, not in pain, in convergence. Breath burned through his lungs like wind across a desert chamber. Mirrors cracked behind his eyes. Rivers wailed through his veins. Serpents coiled in his shadow. Iron pulsed with each heartbeat. Orchid vapors filled his mind with visions. Moonlight poured into his skull like liquid frost. The presence behind him stepped closer, finally touching his back, pressing silence into his spine. Time cracked. Dream and waking fused. Shadow and light braided. Night crowned itself in him. He did not fall. He did not scream. He accepted. The crown sank through his skin, fusing, binding, devouring, completing. He exhaled once, soft, cold, ancient. The codex closed itself. The archivist transformed. When his vision cleared, the vault was different, dim, endless, filled with faint glimmers, like the afterimages of kings drifting through stone. He rose slowly, not stiffly, not painfully. He rose as though the vault was lifting him. The codex sat before him, sealed once more. Its stone cover bore a new symbol, a circle of darkness crowned with 15 spokes. The archivist reached toward it. The codex did not open, not for hands, but he felt the pages turning inside him. Symbols glowed behind his eyes. Rituals hummed in his veins. Visions whispered behind his heartbeat. He understood now. The archivist did not record the final ritual. He was the final ritual. But something still lingered in the vault, the presence that had followed him through every page. He turned slowly, permitted now. A figure stood there, veiled, silent, radiant with moonlit shadow. Neither king nor companion, neither serpent nor spirit. Something older. It bowed, not to the archivist, to the crown inside him. He inclined his head in return. The presence's veil shifted, slightly, like a breath of approval. Then it faded, dissolving into drifting lines of silver dust. The tradition continues. The archivist looked down at the codex. Another line had appeared on the cover, carved fresh in stone, glowing faintly. When the next seeker descends, you will be the presence behind the veil. His breath stilled. The vault's torches relit themselves in silent blue. The air warmed slightly. The codex waited. And so did he. 4 years. 4 centuries. For the next voice that would speak the chain unbroken. He stood by the codex, silent, veiled in shadow not his own. A figure of ritual. A guardian of the night laws. A king crowned not with gold but with darkness shaped into meaning. An archivist recorded in the tradition, not in ink, not in stone, but in the ritual itself. And the crown, somewhere deep inside him, pulsed once. A quiet, eternal heartbeat, waiting for the next descent.